Chapter 344. After comforting his cousin, Qi Bushen walked up to Yang Chendong and said, Duke Zhongdan, this is my Qi mansion. What are you trying to do? Bang! He was answered by a loud gunshot. It was just a gunshot, but it was so loud and sudden that it was completely out of Qi Bushen's expectations. He instinctively took 2 steps back, as if he was really afraid of being hit by the gun. Ha ha ha! Yang Chendong laughed heartily when he saw that Qi Bushen had been scared away by his spear. His gaze then landed on Qi Qing, who had been brought out. He spat out 5 words in a cold voice. Bring him here. Among the mercenaries, a man whose expression had changed greatly was pushed out from the crowd. As soon as he appeared, he attracted everyone's attention, but he didn't have any self-awareness. He didn't even look at anyone. He just pointed at Qi Qing and said, It's him. He teamed up with the second brother of the Black Water Gang, Wu Yong. He wanted to get close to the loyal duke and assassinate him. All of this was arranged by him. I was just following orders. The man who stood out was one of the 2 followers sent by Qi Qing. As for why he was the only one left, it was naturally because the other person had been killed because he refused to cooperate. This scene had happened right before his eyes. In order to save his own life, he would naturally say whatever Yang Wu wanted him to say at this moment. The sudden accusation made Qi Qing, who was being held down, change his expression greatly, and he was even more confused. Only Wu Yong and himself knew about this matter. Unless it was the other party's testimony, he would not believe anyone else's words. At this moment he kept denying it. No, it's not like this. It's not like this. He wronged me. As far as Yang Chendong was concerned, Lu Ping's broken arm must be avenged. The accusation was just a formality. Even if there was no such accusation, would he let Qi Qing off? The answer was, of course, impossible. Since that was the case, why would he be polite? As if he did not hear Qi Qing's shouts, he looked at Kuang Yi and said, Sir Kuang, the witness is here. Can I take him away? Kuang Ye's expression was a little unnatural. Naturally, he could tell that it was a little far-fetched to want to pin Qi Qing down with just one witness. However, he also knew that if he didn't vent his anger, the so-called cooperation with the mercenaries would be impossible. For the bigger picture and for the country, sacrifice was a must. He immediately nodded. Yes, there is a witness here. Duke of Loyalty, you can take Qi Qing away for questioning, but how to deal with him will be handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice. Kuang Yi agreed to Yang Chendong's request to take him away, but at the same time, he also left some leeway. Naturally, he didn't want to offend the mercenaries, but he also didn't want to offend Lu Da. At the very least, before he received the benefits from Yang Chendong, he would not easily make preparations to side with one side. When Qi Bushen heard Kuang Yi say that he could take them away, he wanted to refute. However, when he heard the last sentence, he quickly shut his mouth. Minister Kuang had left him some face. As long as Qi Qing's matter was handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice, he believed that with his connections, Qi Bushen would definitely be able to protect him. Qi Bushen was happy, and so was Yang Chendong. After laughing a few times, he took 2 big steps forward and whispered something in Kuang Ye's ear. With this sentence, Kuang Ye's originally very serious face instantly became much better. Just as Kuang Ye's expression became better and Qi Bushen felt that something was wrong, a gunshot rang out again. Bang! The sound reverberated throughout the front yard. As the gunshot rang out, a bloody hole appeared on Qi Qing's forehead. Then his eyes became blurry, and he fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, he couldn't be more dead. Yang Chendong was the one who fired the shot. Just as Kuang Ye's expression became happy, he had already fired the shot. While everyone was still in shock over this sudden turn of events, he had already put away his Type 54 pistol, turned around, and walked out of the Qi Mansion's main gate. As he walked, his voice could be heard. I'm really sorry. It went off by accident. Ha! Yang Chendong left just like that. He had suddenly barged in, arrested, and killed someone. It seemed that this series of events had been premeditated and had caught everyone off guard. Qi Bushen was stunned for a full 2 breaths. Suddenly, his eyes burned with anger as he looked at Yang Chendong's departing back. He shouted loudly, Men, arrest this murderer for this official. Let's see who dares. Almost as soon as Qi Bushen's voice fell, Kuang Ye's voice also rang out. The Qi Mansion's guards, who were about to make a move, were stunned when they heard Minister Kuang's words. Then, before they could react, Guanning had already led a group of men to block the Qi Mansion's gate to the outside world. Their actions seemed to be saying that no one could leave at will without Minister Kuang's order. Kuang Yi, what are you doing? Qi Bus Hen, who was burning with anger, had lost his composure at this time. In his anger, he actually shouted Minister Kuang's full name. However, Kuang Yi was not angry about this. He could understand Qi Bushen's feelings at this moment and even understand the anger in his heart. However, if he had a choice, he would still let Yang Qindong go. All of this was not only because the other party had saved his life, but also because of a more important point. Earlier, the Duke of Loyalty had clearly said to him, "We can discuss the matter of hiring mercenaries. You can come to the mansion tomorrow to have a chat." Kuang Yi could finally let go of the stone that had been hanging high in his heart. At this time, how could he allow anything to happen to Yang Qindong? Not to mention that the one who died was Qi Qing. Even if Qi Bus Hen was killed by Yang Qindong, he would not arrest him on the spot. Instead, he would send someone to report the matter to Ying Zong before making a decision. After all, everything was for the sake of the big picture. For the sake of the big picture, it was worth it to make some sacrifices. Seeing that Qi Bus Hen had shouted his full name, Kuang Yi gently shook his head. "Magistrate Qi, have a good night's rest. When your emotions have stabilized, we can talk again. As for what happened today, I will personally write a letter to Minister Liu and tell him the whole story." After saying this, Kuang Yi turned to the Hangzhou City Guard Commander Tong Qiao, who seemed to be scared silly, and said, "You stay and comfort Magistrate Liu. Before this matter is settled, the people of the Qi Mansion should not go out casually." This meant that he wanted to keep an eye on Qi Bus Hen. After understanding this, Tong Qiao immediately nodded and said respectfully, "Please rest assured, Your Excellency." Yang Qindong and Kuang Yi left, leaving Qi Qing's body on the ground and the Hangzhou City Magistrate Qi Bus Hen, who was in pain. The Qi Mansion's courtyard was impenetrable from the inside to the outside. Not even a bird could come out. This was the effect of power. The fist was the absolute truth. Yang Qindong and the others left the Qi Mansion. Tiger's Mane was carefully observing the surrounding movements, especially behind him. Beta Persei had taken the initiative to take over the task. Together with Battalion Commander Wu Shang, they loaded their guns and waited for a possible counterattack. Everyone, rest assured. As long as they are not stupid, no one will come looking for trouble. Let's go back to the courtyard and have a good rest. I'm afraid we have something to discuss tomorrow. Yang Qindong stretched and entered the iconic luxurious carriage. Not long after, the sound of snoring could be heard from the carriage. Just as Yang Qindong had said, the next morning, just after breakfast, Kuang Yi brought Guanning to the Chong family's courtyard for the second time. Kuang Ye's impatience was not in line with the style of discussing important matters. Based on experience, the person who lost their cool first would be the one who would pay the most in the negotiation. Yang Qindong could understand Kuang Ye's desire to hire the mercenaries for help, but he did not expect him to be so impatient. When the two of them sat down, Kuang Yi said, "Zhu Huichen's matter has blown up. Zhaoji has sent troops." Smart people understood what was going on. Yang Qindong was startled when he heard this. Then, he nodded with a serious expression. "I see. Since that's the case, let's get straight to the point. I can talk to the mercenaries, but the Imperial Court must give you generous conditions. Also, you need to talk to the Daizong. To be honest, my two wives have many properties in the capital in the north. If the arrangements there are not clear, I won't help either." The Imperial Court of the Southern Ming Dynasty was well aware of the Daizong's attitude toward Yang Qindong. It was truly a case of using and guarding. Otherwise, Yang Qindong would not be unable to bring his family back when he wanted to go back to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. If the Southern Ming Dynasty wanted Yang Qindong to help, they had to get Bai Ming's permission. Kuang Yi had thought about this very clearly last night. Therefore, when Yang Qindong made the request, he readily agreed. "Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Since you want to help us, how can we let you worry about trivial matters? We will communicate with King Yu, but I'll have to trouble you to talk to the mercenaries first. After all, war waits for no one." Well said, well said. Since that's the case, let's work together." Yang Qindong nodded. Originally, Negotiations were a very taxing matter, but because of Yang Qindong's magnanimity, it didn't even take an hour before Kuang Yi left. Of course, the main reason why Yang Qindong did not make things difficult for Kuang Yi was because of the Jiaoji army. Yang Qindong's dream was to realize the great Han dynasty's unification of the world. In order to achieve this goal, any foreign race would inevitably become his imaginary enemy. In the future, he could either conquer them or submit to them. Under such circumstances, how could he allow someone to invade the territory of the Han and ride on their heads? If Kuang Yi knew of Yang Qindong's ambitions, he would probably be willing to pay even less for this negotiation. He did not know that Yang Qindong had never been soft-hearted when it came to foreign invasions. Even if he was not invited, he would find a way to stand out and help. Chapter 345. Nanjing. As the supporting capital of Great Ming, it was the earliest capital of Great Ming. Because of Tu Mu's defeat, Zhu Qizhan of Ying's sect came here and built a new capital here. Speaking of which, Zhu Qizhan was the most special emperor of the Ming dynasty. He had set 3 records in his life. Firstly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had been captured. In this life, due to Yang Qindong, he was lucky not to be captured. Secondly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty. Daizong Zhu Qiyu now addressed him as such. Thirdly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had ascended the throne twice. When the South Ming was built, he still called himself Ingzong. He held another ascension ceremony and promoted officials. Furthermore, these records did not show that he was a great emperor. History didn't have a high opinion of him either. The process of being defeated, captured, lost his position, and restored just happened to prove that his fate was bumpy. It was because of such experiences that Zhu Qizhan wanted to do something more than any other emperor to prove his ability. With that, after establishing the South Ming, he had turned over a new leaf. He gave up on eating and playing and focused all his energy on ruling the country. His dream was to unify the great Ming dynasty one day and return to the throne of the emperor in the capital of the north. Unfortunately, the heavens did not seem to have played with him enough. No matter how hard he worked, the problems that should have appeared were not small. On the contrary, they were getting worse and worse. Just as Zhu Qizhan was developing the military and land, the chaos in the south still appeared. Not only that, the scale was even larger than in history, and even Jiaoji sent out troops. During the Yongle period, Zhu Di had conquered Jiaoji, present-day Vietnam. At that time, the one leading the troops was the late Duke Ing Zhangfu. With the strength of the Ming army, they defeated them and established Jiaoji province. However, as the journey was too far, there were many things that could not be done. In 1431 AD, Jiaoji province was removed, and Li Li accepted the title of Ming dynasty and became the Anan king. This was a huge blow to the prestige of the central government toward the southwest chieftains. Following which, Shi Duo proved that the negative effects of Xuande abandoning Jiaoji were long-term and fatal. This incident dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's international reputation in the western region, and shook the Ming dynasty's suzerain status. Losing Anan meant losing the west. This was something that Zhu Zhanji probably did not expect. From then on, Anan continued to disturb the border and invade the land. This time, Min Zhuang King Huading took the initiative to find Li Li King, who was old but still had great ambitions. After promising him great benefits, they who were already restless finally moved out. Once Jiaoji enters the war, the Yunnan affair will only get bigger and bigger. Moreover, the chaos in Guangdong seems to be mutual, so the rear is bound to be in chaos. How was he going to make Zhu Qizhan focus on developing the nation's power and plotting by Ming to unify the country? Chaos meant that more people would suffer. Chaos meant that the emperor's imperial power would be shaken, which would inevitably be tainted by historians. Chaos meant that a rebellion would need to be quelled, which meant that a lot of money would have to be spent and a lot of troops would have to be mobilized. All of these were things that Zhu Qizhan didn't want to see, so he naturally had a headache because of this. At this time, Empress Qian suddenly suggested asking the Duke of Loyalty for help during the banquet. In her words, since this young Duke of Loyalty could even force back the elite Walla army, he should be able to solve the chaos in the south. Empress Qian said this because she heard the words of the eunuch beside her. However, no matter who she heard it from, she felt that it made sense and said it. This was exactly what Zhu Qizhan wanted. Zhu Qizhan, who was familiar with history books, had seen the deeds of many wise emperors. He found that they all had a common characteristic, which was that they knew how to use people and were good at using capable people. Without a doubt, Yang Chendong was a capable person. Other than his age being too young, whether it was his experience, background, or what he had done, it all proved that he was a useful talent. Such a great talent, but he couldn't be used by the southern Ming dynasty, which made him vexed. Fortunately, Prince Cheng, Zhu Qiyu, didn't seem to know how to use people. At least when it came to Yang Chendong, he didn't use the method of using him. Instead, he kept on guard until everyone in the world could see his intentions. This gave Zhu Qizhen a glimmer of hope. It could be said that the heavens were helping him. During the chaos in the south, the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, had to leave the capital to avoid the limelight because he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. At this moment, he was in his own territory. How could he let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity? He immediately sent someone to inform the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was patrolling the various military guard stations, that he had to use Yang Chendong no matter what. As long as the other party's conditions were not too excessive, he could agree to them one by one. This led to the meeting between Kuang Yi and Yang Chendong in Hangzhou. Now, Minister Cheng had reported the details of his meeting with Yang Chendong, as well as the conditions that Yang Chendong had proposed. After Zhu Qizhen read it carefully twice, he had an idea. He called the Minister of Personnel, Chen Sun, Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhua, Minister of Rights, Minister of Justice, Xiao Chua, Minister of Works, Shang Lu, and other important officials to the front of the palace for questioning. The ministers and important officials knelt first. After they rose, Zhu Qizhen said in a somewhat impatient voice, "Everyone, I wish to use Yang Chendong, the Duke of Loyalty, as a general to quell the chaos in the south. What do you all think?" There was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, especially in the palace. Often, even a trivial matter would be infinitely magnified in the eyes of the officials. Needless to say, Kuang Yi had sent back a letter. It had passed through the hands of a few people to reach Zhu Qizhen. This news had long been leaked by outsiders. As officials favored by the emperor and relied on as important officials, which one of them had not experienced the ups and downs of the official world for decades? They had the ability to see through people's hearts. This time, the emperor had issued an edict, so they had gone through a lot on the way here. Now that they were asked by Zhu Qizhen, they all spoke in unison, "Your Majesty is wise." Seeing that no official came forward to stop him, Zhu Qizhen was overjoyed. He looked at the Minister of Rights, Lu Da, and said, "Minister Lu, the Duke of Loyalty has made a request. He can lead the troops, but he needs Prince Cheng's approval. I want to let the Ministry of Rights do the work. How about it?" This official obeys. Lu Da held the ceremonial tablet and walked out of the room. Good. But who does Minister Lu want to send? Zhu Qizhen nodded with satisfaction. He already knew that Lu Da's brother-in-law had been humiliated by Yang Chendong in Hangzhou. However, his thoughts were the same as Minister Kuang Ye's. As an emperor, he only cared about the overall situation and would not take such a small matter to heart. At most, he would give Qi Bushen an official position later. Lu Da did not know what Zhu Qizhen was thinking, but at this moment he said with a serious face, "Your Majesty, since it is such a big matter, this official thinks that we should send Assistant Minister Yang. This will make it more serious." The so-called Assistant Minister Yang was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. Speaking of which, Yang Shan was one of the 9 officials saved by Yang Chendong. His original position was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After he followed Yingzong to Nanjing, his position was restored and he was still the left Assistant Minister. Yang Shan used to be an official in the northern capital, so he knew the situation there very well. He was also a rank 3 official. Even if he went to the northern capital, he would have a high rank. It could be said that Lu Da's arrangement was very suitable. Good. As per your request, let Yang Shan go to Prince Cheng's place to talk. Zhu Qizhen nodded with satisfaction. This person was exactly what he wanted, so he immediately agreed. The conversation between the monarch and the official ended quickly. After Zhu Qizhen left for the harem, several important ministers left the hall in 2s and 3s, heading out of the palace. Minister of Works Jiang Yuan and Lu Da walked together. When he saw that there was no one around, he couldn't help but chuckle. "Minister Lu, good method. Yangshan will be in trouble this time. Sigh, why did Lord Jiang say that? This old man is wholeheartedly working for the country. Lu Da's expression froze for a moment, then he shook his head and smiled. Clearly, he already knew that Jiang Yuan had seen through his little trick. Although it was a little trick, it was actually an overt scheme. As mentioned before, Lu Da was the only minister of the 6 ministries who was from Nanjing. Because of this, he was a little special. This caused many people to look at him with envy and a trace of jealousy. Naturally, there were people who were unhappy. Among those who were unhappy, the most important one was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. The left assistant minister was a rank 3 official and was only one step away from being a minister. However, it was often this step that many people couldn't reach in their lifetime. Not only did this require the emperor's favor, experience, ability, popularity, and luck. Yang Shan's luck seemed to be a bit worse. There was a Lu Da above him, and he was not much older than him. Under such circumstances, it would be extremely difficult for him to stand out. Because it was difficult. Difficult did not mean that there was no hope at all. For example, as long as Lu Da stepped down, his opportunity would naturally come. Because of this, whether Yang Shan did it intentionally or not, it was very difficult for him to walk the same path as Lu Da. This caused the problem of internal consumption. Naturally, Lu Da had noticed this long ago. However, he also knew that this Yang Shan was quite popular. In addition, he had walked out of the battlefield with Ying Zong. It seemed that compared to others, he had a bit more friendship. This kind of person was not someone he could suppress or deal with as he wished. It had to be said that Lu Da had some ability. He knew what the situation was, but he did not make it public. He just kept it in his heart and waited for the right opportunity to strike. Now, the opportunity had come. The emperor was going to send someone to Beiming to discuss some matters. Speaking of which, this was the first time that southern Beiming had come into contact with Beiming since it was established. Most likely, no one was confident in this matter, so he gave this task to Yang Shan. This seemed to be a matter of selecting talents, but wasn't it just making things difficult for him? This was because everyone could see that Zhu Qizhen did not want to pay too much and wanted to get things done. This task was not easy for anyone else. Chapter 346. If things didn't go well, Yang Shan might even be humiliated. At that time, he would be able to openly attack this person. Of course, there was another reason for sending Yang Chendong. It was to make things difficult for Yang Chendong. Didn't this person slap his wife's brother's face in Han province? Now, he sent Yang Chendong, who had a relatively straightforward personality, to handle this matter. If this failed, Dai Zong, who was already a thorn in Emperor Dai Zong's side, would have an even harder time. This was also why Jiang Yuan said that he had some tricks up his sleeves. Regarding this, Lu Da did not explain. He only chuckled and let it go. Lu Da made his move and the job fell into Yang Shan's hands. When the Imperial edict was issued, he was in a difficult position at home. Normally, to become an official of the Ministry of Rights, one had a good temper and was eloquent. Yang Shan was good at speaking, but his personality was a little too honest. To be specific, he was a little too frank. His personality was rare among diplomats, so it was easy for him to offend some people at work. Back then, it was thanks to Hu Zhao's appreciation and help that he was able to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Rights. This was also one of the reasons why Zhu Qizhen didn't promote him to Minister of Rights. Of course, Yang Shan was quite capable, especially when it came to execution. It was because of this that he became the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights without too many people objecting. However, no matter how capable he was, this matter was difficult for him. Ying Zong wanted to use the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to ask him to speak in front of Dai Zong. However, the Imperial edict did not give him any authority. On the contrary, it implied that Ying Zong was one level higher than Dai Zong. To be able to use his people was giving him face. This kind of condition was difficult for Yang Shan. This became an impossible mission. Unfortunately, Ying Zong was too arrogant. Even if he went to speak, he wouldn't be able to make it clear. Instead, he would make the emperor unhappy. Yang Shan really wanted to ask the emperor for some conditions regarding this matter. Since he wanted the emperor's help, he couldn't use a commanding tone. He had to give him some benefits. Unfortunately, he probably wouldn't be able to see them because he had offended Cao Jixiang and Men Dao at work. Cao Jixiang was the head eunuch of Ingzong's side, the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate. His position was similar to Wang Zhen. Once, because the eunuchs under his command acted irrationally, Cao Jixiang had censured them. Even if Cao Jixiang personally came out to intercede, it was useless. With this grudge, she naturally did not want to see the emperor at this critical moment. Menda, the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. He was also one of the important officials that Ingzong trusted and was in charge of the security of the Imperial Palace. This person also had a relative who wanted to enter the Ministry of Rights through Yang Shan's connections, but was rejected at the door. Because of this, he was filled with hatred. Both ministers had been offended, and he had not received an imperial edict from the emperor to meet him. How difficult would it be to enter the palace to meet the emperor? At this moment, Yang Shan realized that he was actually quite a failure as a person. At this critical moment, no one was willing to speak up for him. Could it be that the heavens wanted the Yang family to die? Once the imperial edict was issued, there was no room for negotiation. Lu De even requested for him to leave the capital within 24 hours, which was 2 days. He said that the matter of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was very urgent and could not be delayed. With the imperial edict and the pressure of the officials, Yang Shan was unyielding and did not beg anyone. Within 24 hours of receiving the imperial edict, which was the morning of the second day, he left the capital. Although he knew that this mission would be very difficult to complete, if he did not go, the Yang family would also be unlucky. Using himself to exchange for the safety of his family, no matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. When Yang Shan left, he did not even say goodbye to anyone. He just took the corresponding document that could prove his identity and left. Naturally, no one thought highly of him when he left this time. Even the entire Yang residence was filled with the sound of crying. It was as if they knew that the chances of their master going this time were slim. Even if Dai Zong did not kill him, if he could not complete the mission, Ingzong would not spare him when he returned. This was because of the last time when he left the capital, there was someone behind him who made King Yu the emperor. Since coming to the capital, Zhu Qizhen had been more careful. For example, he was more cautious about the ability of his subordinates to manage them. For a third-rank official like Yang Shan in the capital, there were naturally hidden sentries of the embroidered uniform guards around the residence. Normally, they would keep an eye on everything here. Once they discovered any abnormal movements, they would immediately respond to them. But now that Yang Shan had left, from outside, there were sorrowful cries coming from the residents every day. This made the embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of monitoring feel sympathetic and relaxed their guard. Even when they saw an opera troupe enter the Yang residence, they did not do much inspection. The opera troupe performed for 3 days before it ended. Even if the opera troupe was closed, there would still be cries coming from time to time. Yang Shan brought the relevant documents to prove his identity from Nanjing. He traveled through wind and rain all the way. It took him only 8 days to cover a distance of nearly 1,200 kilometers. It was nearly 300 kilometers in a day. Even with his body, it was unbearable. But Yang Shan had no other choice, because he was worried that if he was negligent, he would be charged with another crime. If that happened, all his hard work would be for naught. For the sake of his family, he had no choice but to rush along. In his grief and indignation, by the time he reached the capital, he had fallen ill. The capital had already received news of Yang Shan's arrival. And with the exaggeration of Lu Da and the others, the purpose of his arrival was already known in advance. In the throne room of the Imperial Palace, Zhu Qiyu had already pushed away all the things on the dragon table in anger. At this time, his chest was still panting heavily. It was obvious that he was very angry. It was no wonder. Lu Da had spread the news that Yang Shan came to the capital as the representative of Ingzong Zhu Qizhen to reprimand Zhu Qiyu. Having no monarch, father, brothers, and ministers were the 4 major crimes. It was to show the righteousness of the Southern Ming and to show that the Southern Ming was the legitimate identity. As for speaking up for Yang Chendong, it was just a matter of convenience. It gave people the feeling that the person who Bai Ming was giving face to Prince Cheng. When the news first came, Zhu Qiyu had already lost his temper in the Imperial Palace. It was said that a blind eunuch was even kicked twice because of this. This was the second time he had lost his temper in the main hall. Relatively speaking, This was more of an act for the officials to see. At the same time, it was also a kind of test. To be able to enter this palace, which one of them wasn't a shrewd old thing? At this time, all of them had their heads lowered. When they raised their heads, their eyes were filled with anger. They expressed their dissatisfaction with Baiming, dissatisfaction with Ingzong Zhu Qizhen, and their support for Zhu Qiyu, as well as their determination to stand together. After all, Ingzong was once their master. The ancient said that loyal officials did not serve two masters. The fact that everyone was still standing here meant that they had already lost their position as officials. At this time, it was naturally not good for them to criticize anyone. Otherwise, if this spread out, it would be detrimental to their reputation. The officials of ancient times still regarded their reputation as extremely important. At least on the surface, they did things very well. It was because of this that even though they knew that Ingzong had gone overboard, none of the officials stood out to say anything. Everyone's silence was perhaps the main reason why Zhu Qiyu lost his temper for the second time. Zhu Qiyu himself was the clearest about the process of ascending to the throne. It was an extraordinary act in extraordinary times. It was because of this that he was even more worried that things would repeat themselves. If these officials overthrew him like how they had pushed him to become the emperor, what should he do? At that time, it might be impossible for him to return to being Prince Cheng. He was afraid, so he needed his officials to express their loyalty. Only then could he feel more at ease. Otherwise, if there was really a day when he went up against Zhu Qizhen, who knew if there would be someone behind him who would stab him in the back? One side was probing, while the other side was thinking about their own reputation. This formed a kind of invisible confrontation, just like now. No one spoke, and an awkward atmosphere naturally arose. What? Don't you have anything to say? The atmosphere in the throne room was very quiet. Finally, the young Zhu Qiyu, who was wearing an imperial robe with a golden dragon, could not hold himself back and took the initiative to speak. However, there was a trace of anger in his voice. The emperor was angry, and the officials were nervous. However, they were only nervous. It was not to the extent of being afraid. This time, it was not just one person who did not express their opinion. Instead, all the smart people did so. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, what was there to be afraid of? This was the so-called, the law could not punish the majority. Even if you were the emperor, there was nothing you could do if the people below didn't say anything. Some people would say, "Isn't the emperor the most powerful? If they don't listen, you can just kill them." However, if you really did this, all the officials would be in danger. Who would dare to work for you? Your country would naturally be unstable. After questioning, there was still no one speaking. The angry Zhu Qiyu decided to call out names. He wanted to force everyone to express their opinions. Although this method would lose the emperor's face, in order to stabilize his position, he could not care less. His gaze swept over the officials. The first person he saw was the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao. Speaking of which, Hu Shao was the oldest among the officials. He had also been an official for the longest time. He had served many emperors of the great Ming dynasty. At the same time, as the Minister of Rights, his attitude was extremely important. Zhu Qiyu looked at Hu Shao and said, "Beloved official Hu, why don't you speak first? What is the difference between the Southern and Baiming dynasties? Who is the true orthodox?" Suddenly being called out, Hu Shao, who was holding a ceremonial tablet and wearing official robes, trembled slightly. There was a struggle and hesitation on his face, but he did not know what to say. Chapter 347. He had long received the news that Xianxia had come to the capital as the representative of the Ying sect. He was even one step ahead of the Imperial court and knew more inside information. But it was precisely because of this that he was in a difficult position. He did not even accept the suggestion given to him by a certain person. In his view, if he did that, he could not be called a truly loyal official. Perhaps his existence would be tarnished in the history books. The moment he decided not to accept that person's suggestion, Hu Shao was already prepared to be struck by the emperor's anger. However, even at this point, he was still unwilling. He was unwilling to be the first person to be called out. Zhu Qiyu asked bluntly. He chose Hu Shao as his first target. The other courtiers held their breaths as they watched this scene with rapt attention. Everyone knew that the emperor was going to make an example out of someone. Unless you directly stated your position, there would not be a good result. But they did not know how Zhu Qiyu would deal with it. After all, minister who was an old official of several dynasties. More importantly, he had a granddaughter. His son-in-law was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He was an outstanding person. Not long ago, he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue, in a fit of anger. He was also a person favored by the emperor, but he did not protect him. Such a Duke of Loyalty and Courage was not as simple as a title. He was a truly capable person. But the emperor still made an example out of Hu Xiao. It could be seen that this time he was serious. The other officials watched how Hu Xiao was going to answer himself and how Zhu Qiyu was going to deal with it. They were also thinking about how to deal with it when they were called out next. Hu Xiao was still standing there in silence. From time to time, he recalled what a certain person had said to him. On the other hand, he was thinking about how the history books would evaluate him if he did that. As he struggled, time passed by. Zhu Qiyu on the dragon throne seemed to be a little impatient. Beloved official Hu, we are talking to you. Could it be that you are old and muddle-headed? Your Majesty, this official has something to say. Zhu Qiyu was clearly angry and even began to reprimand Hu Xiao. If he did not get the response he wanted, he would probably fly into a rage. It was possible that he would be removed from office and punished. One of the officials raised his head and took a step forward. The person who spoke was the newly appointed Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen, a second-rank official. Your Majesty, as the Son of Heaven, you are naturally the Son of Heaven. When you ascended the throne, you announced to the world that you are the ruler of this generation. Ever since you ascended to the throne, you stabilized the court, repelled the Walla, and defeated the Woku pirates. You brought peace to the Northern Territory, and these actions only serve to show that you are a true dragon, the Son of Heaven. On the other hand, the retired emperor, who received the emperor's grace, did not pursue the matter of Tumu's fiasco. After settling down in Nanjing, he did not achieve even an inch of merit. On the contrary, he caused the southern imperial families Wuxia and common people to rebel one after another, resulting in the common people having no way to make a living. With this kind of conduct, how could he face the common people of the world? At this time, he actually sent someone to reprimand Your Majesty. This is truly laughable. Extremely laughable. After Su Yozhen finished speaking, she actually laughed 3 times in front of the court officials. However, these 3 sounds had their own reasons. The first laugh was because of the emperor's lack of self-confidence. Since he had already become the emperor, how could he be afraid of others saying that he was not the legitimate emperor? If he even cared about this point, then it could only prove one thing, and that was that he had preconceived that he was not the legitimate emperor. The second laugh was because of the reaction of the court officials. Normally, they would say how loyal they were to the emperor. However, when it came to the issue of reputation, they all wanted to be a good person. Then weren't they just deceiving themselves and others? The third laugh was because of themselves. The court officials could see that this matter was not easy to express. If they did not handle it well, they would be condemned in the history books. However, even though they knew this, they still stood up. They really had their own difficulties. The news from the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, arrived a bit earlier than the official news from the court. At the same time, a letter arrived. The letter explained in detail what might happen in the Northern Ming dynasty, and what Su Yozhen should do if she was willing to do so. In the letter, Yang Chendong did not ask Su Yozhen to do anything. However, with this letter in hand, how could he dare to neglect it? On the surface, the relationship between the two was extremely bad. It could even be said that they were enemies. However, all of this was just a cover. Su Yozhen was able to become the head of the Ministry of Works from a small imperial censor. It was all the result of Yang Chendong's secret operations. If all of this was made public, with Zhu Qiyu's personality, he would definitely not forgive him. At that time, he would lose everything he had, even his life. He had to listen to Yang Chendong's orders. If he did as he was told, he would become an evil person who was not loyal to the emperor. How to choose was truly a difficult choice. Because of this difficult situation, when Zhu Qiyu called everyone into the hall, he did not immediately express his attitude. He was still thinking about whether or not he could muddle through. He did not expect that the emperor would call out Minister Hu Ming's name. At this moment, he was pushed into a very awkward situation. Hu Ming was the grandfather of Yang Qindong's legal wife, Hu Yan. At this moment, he was going to Jianghu Prefecture to worship the ancestors. If he watched Hu Pa get into trouble and didn't save her, who knew what this young but bold loyal guild member would do? He was afraid that he would not have a good ending. If he stuck out his head, he would be stabbed. If he retracted his head, he would still be stabbed. However, if he stuck out his head, he would be able to live well. Not only would he be able to report to Yang Qindong, but he would also be able to express goodwill to the emperor. There was no need to hesitate about what to choose. Thus, Su Yozhen stepped out. He used this method to raise Zhu Qiyu up high. At the same time, he also stepped on Zhu Qizhen, who he had previously called the emperor, and degraded him to be worthless. Perhaps some of Su Yozhen's words were true, while some were slightly exaggerated. But the most important thing was his attitude. He actually took that step and spoke badly of Ingzong in front of everyone. This was not something a loyal official should do. For a time, everyone looked at Su Yozhen with different expressions. Some were shocked, some were angry, some were shameless, some were disdainful, some were envious, and so on. No matter how others looked at Su Yozhen, Zhu Qiyu was happy at this moment. Originally, when he saw that everyone did not speak, he was angry. In order to prevent everyone from two-timing, he decided to call out their names one by one and force them to express their views. In Zhu Qiyu's view, if these officials did not express their views, then they were disloyal and even hoped that Zhu Qizhen would come back. If that was the case, then at that time, these people would become Ingzong's officials again and could continue to enjoy the glory and wealth. If that was really the case, one could imagine how many officials would be willing to fight to the death for Zhu Qizhen if there really came a day when they had to face him head-on. What were his chances of winning? Forced by this, he had to use this matter to force the officials to express their views. The reality was the same as the worst result he had imagined. Everyone was silent. On the surface, they looked like loyal officials, but in reality, they just wanted to benefit from both sides. In his anger, he wanted to make an example out of Hu Xiao. It was because this person was a powerful official with great influence that he became the monkey to warn the others. At this moment, Su Yozhen's sudden words eased the originally heavy atmosphere. It was as if he had seen the light in the dark night. Zhu Qiyu was happy. Beloved official Su understands the world. Your words are reasonable. Zhu Qiyu was so happy that he called out Su Yozhen's name twice. Lord Su's words are reasonable. You have spoken my thoughts. The head eunuch standing next to Zhu Qiyu, Jin Ing, quickly supported Su Yozhen. Jin Ing was different from the other important officials. As a eunuch, he had to rely on the emperor for what kind of life he could live. If something happened to Daizong, he would not benefit no matter what. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to walk down this path. However, the other officials did not speak. As a eunuch, if he took the lead to express his opinion, it would not be reasonable. That was why he had been suppressing himself and coldly watching the other officials' reactions. Now that Su Yozhen had stood up and said the words that Zhu Qiyu wanted to hear the most, he immediately made his position clear. Following Jin Ying's statement, the other officials also said in unison, Lord Su's words are reasonable. You have spoken my thoughts. Haha, good. The sudden change in the situation made Zhu Qiyu very happy. Although he knew that some people had to say something against their will because of the situation, no matter what, he had at least won this battle on the surface. And the key to this victory was Su Yozhen. Thinking that this person was so considerate of him, he was a true loyal official. The more he looked at him, the more pleasing he was to the eye. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want his table manners to be too unsightly, he was afraid that he would have added Su Yozhen as the Grand Tutor of the Crown Prince, which was equivalent to a first-class official. Official Su, hear the decree. I order you and the Ministry of Rights to be responsible for receiving Yangshan and raising the prestige of our country. Zhu Qiyu's voice rang out in the court. Su Yozhen knelt on the ground and gratefully accepted the decree. At this moment, he had no other way out. With what he had just said, if Ingzong really came back one day, he probably would not end well. In a sense, he was now a grasshopper on the same rope as Daizong. The small court meeting, which should have been very tense, ended. Zhu Qiyu left the hall with satisfaction, accompanied by eunuch Jin Ing. Only then did the other officials walk out in twos and threes. However, it was clear that Su Yozhen, who was usually quite popular, had become a loner. It was as if he had contracted an infectious disease. People could not help but keep a respectful distance from him. Chapter 348. The Minister of Rites, Hu Shao, pondered for a moment, then strode over to Su Yozhen's side. Many officials saw this, but they all had understanding expressions. After all, if Su Yozhen had not taken the initiative to stand up, Hu Shao would not have been able to be an official of the same court as them. Minister Hu. After seeing Hu Shao walk over, Su Yozhen's expression was respectful, and his head was slightly lowered. It was clear that this was not because Hu Shao's status or position was higher than his, but because it was sincere respect from the bottom of his heart. Thank you, Minister Su. Hu Shao smacked his lips. It seemed that it was difficult for him to say the word, thank you. However, when he actually said it, he relaxed a lot. I don't dare. Su Yozhen hurriedly shook his head. This person was not as simple as an old official. His grandson-in-law was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Because of this, he had to be respectful, and he could only be respectful. There's nothing I wouldn't dare to do. If it weren't for Minister Su's help, I'm afraid I would have been kicked out of the Imperial court by now. Hu Shao also shook his head, looking as if he deserved the word, thank you. Not at all. With the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, how could anything happen to Minister Hu? I'm sure that even if I didn't stand up, someone else would have. When Su Yozhen said this, he intentionally looked around. The more time he spent with Yang Qindong, the more he learned, the more he admired this person. Based on his intuition, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would not only have one trump card. He should have prepared something else, but it was not the right time, so he would not reveal it. Him. When he heard Su Yozhen mention Yang Qindong's name, a relaxed smile appeared on Hu Zhao's face. He was indeed satisfied with this grandson-in-law. Not only was he the grandson of an old friend, but his talent was also admirable. Now, even he had to show his gratitude to him for protecting him. When he thought of this, how could he not be satisfied? However, before the smile could fully blossom on his face, he became a lot calmer. What he did this time is really too bold. Won't Yang Xijing, Yang Shan, be implicated? How is he going to live in the future? Speaking of Yang Shan's matter, Su Yozhen saw that no one was paying attention to him and whispered, Minister Hu, regarding this matter, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has already made plans, but we still need your cooperation. When he heard the word, cooperate, Hu Shao instinctively wanted to shake his head and refuse. After all, he really didn't want to do something like scamming his good friend. But considering that even if he didn't show up, the matter would still be carried out, and his old friend might still suffer, he could only nod and agree. All right, then this old man will take a look at sieging with Lord Su. That would be great. Minister Hu, please. Su Yozhen felt relieved. If Hu Shao was willing to step in, things would naturally be much easier to resolve. He would also have a much easier time completing the task given to him by Yang Qindong. At the relay station of the capital, Yang Shan, who had been here countless times, was now staying here. In the past, he had come here as the host to receive guests from all over the world. But now, he had become an envoy and was living here. Just from this change in role, one could see Bai Ming's attitude towards him. He didn't treat him as a special envoy of the Shang Kingdom or a representative of the Ying sect, but as an envoy of the Southern Ming Kingdom. Thinking of this, Yang Shan, who had already caught a cold from the bumpy journey, felt even worse. His body was becoming weaker and weaker. It was to the point that he couldn't even receive guests. But when a servant came to report that Minister Hu from the Ministry of Rites had arrived, Yang Shan still insisted on receiving him. He had great respect for Hu Shao, and their relationship could be described as both a teacher and a friend. Not to mention, he had worked under this person for many years. Just based on this, how could he not receive his old superior when he came to see him? In the reception hall of the relay station, Yang Shan walked in with the help of a servant. He saw Hu Shao, who had a peaceful expression and a concerned gaze. Beside him, a man wearing a third-rank official's robe was standing with his hands behind his back and looking at him. He knew this person. He used to be an Imperial censor of the Censorate. He seemed to be a 6th-rank or 5th-rank official. Who would have thought that in such a short time, he would be like him, a 3rd-rank official? Sighing in his heart, Yangshan cupped his fists and said to Hu Shao, "Minister, it's been a long time. Sijing, are you okay with your body?" Seeing that Yangshan's complexion wasn't too good, Hu Shao took a step forward and gently held his arm as he asked with concern. "Thank you for your concern, Minister. I'm fine, I'm fine." Cough, cough, cough. After coughing a few times, Yangshan's face turned green. "Take a seat, take a seat." Hu Shao couldn't bear to see him like this. He pulled Yangshan's arm to a chair and slowly sat down. "Thank you for your concern, Minister." After sitting down, Yangshan's breathing seemed to be smoother, and he spoke with more confidence. Only when he looked at Hu Shao, his face was still full of hope. One could imagine how he was feeling at this moment. Ever since the Battle of Tumu Castle, the two of them had not seen each other for nearly 2 years. Who would have thought that when they met again, they would be serving different masters? Speaking of serving different masters, Yangshan couldn't help but think of his mission this time. The joy of meeting his old friend was diluted a lot at once. "Minister, I'm here with a mission this time, but I wonder what Prince Cheng's attitude is?" "There's no Prince Cheng here? There's only the acting emperor." A voice suddenly sounded out. Needless to say, the person who spoke was naturally Su Yozhen, who had been silent all this time. Yangshan's face turned ghastly pale when he heard that. Fortunately, Hu Shao was here. He was the link between the two sides. Once the situation turned bad, he became a lubricant. Therefore, when he saw Yangshan's expression, he immediately said, "Sijing, this is Lord Su Yozhen. He is now the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. He is also an important official who was personally appointed by the acting emperor to receive you. If you have anything to say, you can talk to him." Yangshan, who was about to reprimand Su Yozhen, frowned when he heard this. Even though they were both third-rank officials, one had to look at their seniority and authority. In terms of seniority, Xianxia was much stronger than the other party. How could he allow a junior to interfere in his conversation with the old minister? However, after this introduction, Yangshan understood that if he wanted to complete the mission given by Yingzong, Su Yozhen would not be able to bypass him. Even so, he politely cupped his fists and said, "So it's Minister Su. Greetings. Assistant Minister Yang, there's no need to be so polite." Su Yozhen also bowed and said, "Since Minister Hu is here today, why don't we take this opportunity to talk things out and see if we can find a balance so that everyone can complete the Emperor's order earlier? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" "Balance?" Yangshan shook his head after hearing this. "Impossible. This is an impossible mission." "How do you know it's impossible without trying?" Su Yozhen raised his voice in response to Yangshan's arbitrary judgment. "How can there be a possibility? Isn't arranging for me to be at the relay station already enough to explain everything?" Yangshan replied Su Yozhen harshly. Hu Shao was his superior, and his seniority was there for all to see. Of course, he couldn't say anything. However, Su Yozhen was a rising star, so he could say whatever he wanted. Yangshan actually saw through the hidden meaning behind arranging for him to be at the relay station. Su Yozhen smiled. He was a smart person and naturally liked to deal with smart people. Even so, there were some things that he could say. However, before he said it, he glanced at Hu Shao, who was frowning, as if he had some scruples. Don't be fooled by the fact that Hu Mingzhu didn't say anything. He was very clear about the conversation between the two and what they were going to say next. It was precisely because he was clear that he felt a little pained. On one side was the great Ming dynasty that he had been loyal to for almost his entire life. On the other side was the grandson-in-law that he was most satisfied with. It was difficult for him to choose which path to take. Of course, from the perspective of righteousness, he would definitely choose to be loyal to the great Ming dynasty without hesitation. However, if he did so, not only him, but his family and relatives would also be implicated. It was not impossible for his entire family to be executed. When he thought about how Dai Zong actually targeted him in the Imperial court during the day and did not care about the fact that he was an old official of several dynasties, did this not already explain a lot of problems? This kind of emperor already had doubts about him. Once he was suspicious, he was afraid that no matter what he did, he would not be able to regain the trust he had in the past. The emperor's distrust and the terrible consequences of revealing everything made Hu Zhao's original balance in his heart lose its original balance. When he noticed Su Yozhen's gaze staring at him, he finally made a decision. That was to not help either side and observe the situation first. Although he said that he would not help either side, from the fact that he knew some of the truth and did not report it, he had already begun to lean towards the loyal Duke Yang Chendong in his heart. You guys talk first, I'll go out to get some fresh air. Hu Xiao got up and casually found a reason to leave, leaving Yang Shan, who was sitting on the chair, feeling puzzled. However, before he could ask anything, Su Yozhen's voice sounded, Minister who is old, it's good to go out to get some fresh air. However, I don't know if official Yang also wants to go out to get some fresh air. You have to know that what I'm going to say next is very important. I'm afraid it will scare you. Chapter 349. Scare me. Originally, his attention was still on Hu Xiao, but because of Su Yozhen's words, he was really provoked. Let me tell you, official Su, I have been on the battlefield and have climbed out from piles of corpses. What kind of scene have I not seen? You want to scare me? Humph. I'm afraid you don't have that kind of ability. Good, very good. Su Yozhen clapped after hearing this and had a look of praise. But then his expression became more serious as he said, Yang Shan, do you know that there is no path in front of you? You are already on a path to death. A path to death? Yang Shan pretended not to understand, but in reality, he was very shocked. Some things were just things that he had thought in his heart and had not been finalized. But how did Su Yozhen know? He was just a newly appointed Minister of Justice. Although he had a high position, he was still a new official. He should not know so many secrets of the Southern Ming dynasty. Seeing that Yang Shan still did not want to admit it and did not want to face the truth, Su Yozhen knew that he had to expose some shocking information. He immediately said with a righteous expression, Official Yang, you are a 17-year-old student. After that, King Yan Zhu Di raised an army, 1399, and started the Battle of Jingnan. Because you participated in the defense of the city, you were given a reward. In the first year of Yongle, you were changed to the Honglu Temple. The Honglu Temple was in charge of ceremonies and ceremonies. Although the position was small, you could often see the emperor. You had a great bearing, loud and clear voice, and always worked diligently. You were often noticed by Zhu Di and later became the right minister of the Honglu Temple. After Ming Runzong ascended the throne, you were promoted to the Honglu Temple. Not long after, you were promoted to the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites and also managed the Honglu Temple, right? Hearing Su Yozhen speak of his life like it was a family treasure, Yang Shan was not very surprised. Things like this could be found as long as one had the heart. Thus, he nodded. That's right. You're right. Go on. Okay. Seeing that Yang Shan refused to give up, Su Yozhen decided not to hold back. She continued, in the Battle of the Tumu Fortress, you were lucky. You were saved by the Duke of Loyalty. Then, you went to Nanjing with Ingzong and created the situation of the Southern Ming dynasty. Speaking of it this way, you can be considered an old official and an important official. However, when Ingzong established the Southern Ming dynasty and rewarded the officials, you didn't get a share. On the contrary, you were still the left assistant minister of the Board of Rites. Do you know why that is? Without waiting for Yang Shan to explain, Su Yozhen had already answered for him. Official Yang, outsiders say that you are an upright and eloquent person. But in fact, you have your own bottom line. Because of this bottom line, you didn't choose to become a river of mud like most officials. Instead, you fell in love with the lotus flower and used the method of growing out of the mud without being stained. It is also because you scrupulously abide by your own bottom line and are unwilling to use power for profit that Ingzong did not choose you as the minister of a department. The minister of a department not only needs to be able to do things, but also needs to know how to do things. However, you only know the former. As for the latter, because of your bottom line, you have offended many people. If Ingzong really handed the Ministry of Rites to you, I'm afraid it would quickly cause chaos. That would be the biggest mistake. Not to mention, because of your unnecessary straightforwardness, you have offended Ingzong's close officials, Chao Jixiang and Menda. Then, because of your ability, you have threatened your superior, Minister Lu Da. Haha, after being an official for so many years, you can actually make enemies everywhere and force yourself into a dead end. To be honest, it is really admirable. Su Yozhen's words seemed to have come to an end, but it had already shocked Yang Shan quite a bit. After being an official for so many years, It wasn't that he had never thought about why he couldn't go further and become the Minister of the Board of Rights from the left assistant minister. But every time he was so close to succeeding. However, that position seemed so far away yet so close at the same time. Every time he had hope, he would be met with disappointment. Finally one day Xianxia thought it through. It was probably because of his bottom line, that he wasn't willing to turn a blind eye to things that others didn't like. That was why he couldn't be handed over to him. However, even if he realized this point, it was easy to change mountains and rivers, but difficult to change one's nature. How could Xianxia be so easily changed? It was just that this was something that he had thought about for many years. Now that Su Yozhen had so casually pointed it out, how could he not be surprised? What made him even more shocked was that the other party knew about his relationship with Lu Da, Chao Jixiang, and Men Da. This kind of thing wasn't something that could be understood just because someone wanted to. That person had to be very familiar with him. Could it be that this Su Yozhen had long noticed him and even collected information about him from various sources? The shock in his eyes lasted for a while. Then, Xianxia painfully shook his head. Right now, it wasn't the time to think about how the other party knew about this. Instead, he was thinking about what he should do next. Was it really like the other party said? Was he really at a dead end? What's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Su Yozhen had a premonition when she saw the shock in Xianxia's eyes, followed by an indifferent attitude. She questioned Xianxia. What are you doing? What do you want me to say? Didn't you say that I'm at a dead end? Xianxia shook his head and looked as if he had lost his soul. His heart was filled with darkness. He thought about how he had sacrificed his youth and half of his life for the great Ming dynasty. He didn't know how many times he had risked his life, but in the end, he still couldn't avoid his family being destroyed. How could he not be disappointed? Xianxia's disappointed expression fell completely into Su Yozhen's eyes. He knew that there were some things that could be said. Everything had gone smoother than he had imagined. He originally thought that Xianxia would still be stubborn for a while, and would only pick a time to say the following words. However, now that Xianxia had thought through everything and was even disheartened, it was time for him to reveal his trump card. Sir Yang, there's indeed no way forward, but why don't you think of taking a step back? As the saying goes, take a step back and you will be able to see the world. Take a step back. For a moment, Xianxia was also a little confused by Su Yozhen's words. However, when he understood the general meaning of the other party's words, he shook his head again. There's no way back. If I can't complete this mission, even if I can return to the capital of Nanjing, those people will not let me go. Even Yingzong will not let me go. I'm afraid that even my family will be implicated. When he talked about his family, Xianxia's expression clearly showed a little more warmth, but it was only for a moment. Yes, family. Who doesn't have a family? The reason why we work so hard, other than hoping to leave our names in history, is nothing more than wanting to let our family live a better life. But sometimes, it's often difficult to achieve such a small request. Sometimes, we even call ourselves the disciples of the sage, saying that we have great power in our hands. Everything is just a joke. It's just that. Sir Yang, your life is very good. You have been chosen, so you still have a way out. Not only will you be fine, but your family will also be fine. Su Yozhen used his family as a starting point and suddenly changed the topic to what she wanted to say today. When he heard Su Yozhen talking about his family, he could not help but think of his dream when he was young. Wasn't it to leave his name in history and let his family live a better life? Just as he was thinking about Fei Fei's words, the tone of the conversation suddenly changed to the matter of someone taking a fancy to him. This caused his mind to slow down for a moment, and even his thoughts seemed to have stopped. He needed to slowly digest the content of the words. After what seemed like a breath or a dozen breaths or a dozen breaths, Xianxia suddenly raised his head. Sir Su, what did you say just now? I said that someone has chosen you, and he will give you a way out, and you may even have a bright future in the future. However, right now, you need to bear some things, and I don't know if you are willing to do so. Su Yozhen's eyes were fixed on Xianxia, waiting for his answer. Give me a way to live? What do I need to do? Xianxia still didn't quite understand, but he roughly knew that other than death, there was still a path to choose from. That was enough. What you need to do is very simple. You just need to. As the saying goes, the walls have ears. Even though there were only the two of them left in the room, Su Yozhen still used the method of whispering when she talked about what was going to happen next. This showed how important this matter was. Yang Shan pricked up his ears to listen, but after a while, his expression changed greatly, and he became agitated. It was unknown whether this agitation was due to anger or happiness, but in short, his face was a little red. Sir Yang, don't be too agitated. You still have time but not much time. How about this? The letter written by your wife should be arriving soon. When the time comes, you can make your own decision. For now, you should have a good rest.
Forgive me for being blunt, but no matter what a person wants to do, whether it is good or bad, they must first have a good body, ha ha ha.
Su Yozhen left, leaving Yang Shan alone in the chair, somewhat absent-minded. At this moment, his mind was filled with many thoughts, many. Hu Shao had already left long ago. He had probably guessed what was going to happen, and it was not suitable for him to stay in this place. After leaving the relay station, Hu Shao had become a lot more taciturn. He had already sensed something, but it was not clear. As such, before he made a final decision, he still needed to take a good look and listen. Jianghu Prefecture. He had been gone for 2 years, and when Yang Qindong returned, he had already changed his identity and became the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty. It was said that both the North the Arch, Zhu Qiyu, and the South the Arch, Zhu Qizhen, thought highly of him and had a deep friendship with him. Chapter 350. When such an important person returned to Jianghu, it would definitely be a sensational event. Outside Jianghu Prefecture, Magistrate Li Daotong was waiting in line with a group of officials. Yang Qindong's impression of Li Daotong was not bad. It was precisely because of this that he gave him face and personally got off the carriage. After exchanging greetings for a while, Yang Qindong used the excuse of being tired from the journey to politely decline the other party's offer to give him a welcome dinner. The group of horses went straight into the Yang residence. The Yang residence became lively because of Yang Qindong's arrival. The old housekeeper, Yang Hai, was busy in front and behind the house. This would be the place for him to retire.
Taking advantage of the fact that the 4th young master and the 6th young master were both here, there were many things that he needed to buy. After the 4th young master, Yang Qindong, arrived at Jianghu Prefecture, he first worshipped the ancestral temple with his 6th brother. Then, out of boredom, he wandered around the various restaurants and even the brothels. With the title of the Duke of Loyalty, it was much more convenient for him to do anything. In contrast, after Ban Qindong arrived at the Yang residence, he quieted down and rarely went out on the streets. However, this didn't mean that he was completely unaware of what was happening outside. On the contrary, many things were under his control. For example, the report from the Security Bureau on his desk clearly recorded what had just happened in the capital. As the representative of Emperor Yingzong, Yang Shan came to Baiming's capital. However, to everyone's surprise, he didn't have the slightest intention of criticizing the acting Emperor Zhu Qiyu. On the contrary, he said that he came to express friendship and acknowledge the legitimacy of the acting Emperor of Baiming. When this matter came out, naturally, the entire court was shocked. The acting Emperor Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed and personally invited Yang Shan to a banquet to express his goodwill. At the banquet, Yang Shan even took out a document with his seal as the representative of Yingzong. When he solemnly handed over the letter of credence, he said that no matter if it was Southern Ming or Baiming, they were all one family. Now that the southern part of the Southern Ming Empire was in chaos, they still needed the help of their brothers. Thus, they took the opportunity to ask for the help of the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong. After receiving Nan Ming's approval, Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed. The other party had only made a small request, so how could he refuse? As such, the matter of Yang Qindong working for the Southern Ming Empire was set in stone. After doing all this, Yang Shan used the excuse that Emperor Yingzong was waiting for news as an excuse to leave. After a night's rest, they left the city early the next morning. No one knew where Yang Qindong had gone. Only the patrolling soldiers saw traces of a group of carriages being robbed. They also found a document with the seal of the acting emperor, Zhu Qiyu. The document stated that Yang Qindong could contribute to the Southern Ming Empire. How could Yang Shan disappear? All of this was naturally Yang Qindong's handiwork. Not only did Yang Shan disappear, even his family members in the Southern Ming Empire's capital had disappeared. In Yingzong, Zhu Qizhen received news that Yang Shan had actually represented him in acknowledging the legitimacy of Baiming's existence. He was so angry that he flipped over the dragon table. Soon after, the embroidered uniform guards left the palace and came to the Yang residence to capture the criminals. Unfortunately, there were indeed people in the Yang residence. However, they were only actors who had come to put on a show a few days ago. They were all tied up in the courtyard and hadn't eaten for 3 days. At this moment, the embroidered uniform guards found out that the Yang family members had already escaped. The embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of leading the team reported this matter to Commander Mengde, who knew Ingzong's fate, was afraid that he would be implicated. Thus, he killed all the actors and lied to the higher-ups that Yang Shan's family members had resisted arrest and were all killed. That was how things had happened. The main person who had put in the effort was Su Yozhen. He had done everything step by step after receiving Yang Qindong's secret letter. For example, he had taken the lead in persuading Yang Shan. Since Yang Shan was disheartened and Su Yozhen could guarantee the safety of his family members, he simply threw caution to the wind and followed the plan to represent Ingzong to acknowledge the existence of Nan Ming. Thus, he was able to leave with his life intact. At this moment, he was being arranged by the security bureau to meet up with his family in Qiqian City. Yang Shan was a capable person. However, because he had a bottom line in his heart, he wasn't willing to wallow in the mire with some people. This kind of capable minister was what Xianxia needed. This time, Luda wanted to push him aside. However, he had forcefully delivered this person into his hands. He didn't know how angry and pained Luda would be after knowing the truth. Putting this information to the side, Yang Qindong slowly leaned back on the wooden chair. It had been more than 20 days since he last saw Kuang Yi in Hangzhou residence. Counting the days, he should be here soon. However, he didn't know what kind of status he would be given this time. Just as Yang Qindong thought, Kuang Yi had already arrived outside Jianghu residence that night. After a good night's rest, he brought a group of followers into the city early the next morning. Magistrate Li Daotong, who had received the news first, brought his men and stood there respectfully. At the same time, he was shocked by what had just happened. He had received the news last night that Kuang Yi, the Minister of War, was going to enter Jianghu residence to discuss important matters with the Duke of Loyalty. Therefore, he had sent someone to the Yang residence the next morning to invite Yang Qindong to personally go out of the city with him to welcome Minister Kuang. The people were sent out, but they quickly rushed back and brought back news that shocked the prefectural magistrate. It was Yang Qindong who said that he would be waiting in the Yang residence. Heavens! This was a minister. After the Imperial court removed the cabinet, he was the most powerful group of people. However, the Duke of Loyalty still didn't seem to take him seriously. What on earth was he relying on? Li Daotong cautiously and nervously saw Kuang Yi, the Minister of War, who had rushed over, looking travel-worn. "Where is the Duke of Loyalty?" Kuang Yi asked when he saw the people who had come to welcome him. His eyes were filled with anxiety. Li Daotong's heart was beating like a drum when he heard this. "Look, she's blaming me now." He had wanted to make up a random lie, such as that the Duke of Loyalty was on his way. However, he didn't have the courage to lie in the face of the old and mighty Minister of War. He immediately told the truth. Minister Kuang, the Duke of Loyalty said that he was waiting in the Yang residence." After saying these words, Li Daotong felt as if all the strength in his body had been drained at this moment. Then, he was ready to bear the wrath of thunder. However, Kuang Yi didn't seem angry at all after hearing the news. Instead, he said, "Since that's the case, you don't have to accompany me. Go do your own things. Guaning, let's go directly to the Yang residence." Kuang Yi wasn't angry. Li Daotong was shocked and understood the importance of the Duke of Loyalty. He hurriedly led the way towards the Yang family's old residence in the city. Although Yang Qindong didn't personally come out to welcome them, the Yang residents had already made arrangements. They had even sent his fourth brother, Yang, to personally welcome them 3 streets away. Kuang Ye's expression was much better after seeing this. It would be impossible to say that he didn't care that Yang Qindong didn't come out to greet him. However, considering that Yang Qindong was a duke and had saved his life, he didn't need to be too calculative about etiquette. Seeing Yang 3 streets away, Kuang Yi knew that Yang Qindong was in the ancestral hall of the Yang family's old residence. After entering the Yang family's residence, Kuang Yi dismissed everyone, leaving only Yang to lead the way. Upon entering the ancestral hall, he saw Yang Chendong, who had changed into a white robe, kneeling on a praying mat. Directly above him was a memorial tablet with Yang Rong's name written on it. When Kuang Yi saw the memorial tablet, he immediately cupped his fists and bowed 3 times. At this time, Yang Chendong had already turned around. Minister Cheng has come to visit my father. If the underworld knows, it will be gratified. Hi, young Master Yang is also someone this old master admires. Since we've met today, I must pay my respects, Kuang Yi said with a calm expression. Speaking of which, Minister Cheng is the first minister to come here to pay respects to my father. All right, wait for me to tidy up. I will have to trouble Minister Cheng to wait in the front hall. Yang Chendong's lips curved into a smile. Yang Chendong turned around and left, leaving Kuang Yi standing there with a thoughtful expression on his face. He was the first minister to come here. Was he hinting at something? Yang Chendong was obviously hinting at something. Thinking of his father, Yang Rong, who was one of the 3 great families. How glorious he was when he was alive. But in the end, he died on the way home. After entering the Yang residence's ancestral hall, no one came to pay their respects. This was the way of the world. The tea cools down after the person is gone. This was not the cold-blooded scene Yang Chendong wanted to see. Since he had contributed to the country, he should be honored by the country at all times. Just like the hero's monument erected in Xianxia City, it was a way to commemorate those who had contributed to the country. In the future, he would also build a large cemetery. Not only the Yang family, but also those who had contributed greatly to the country could be buried there and enjoy the worship of their descendants. Of course, there was another reason why Yang Chendong chose to meet in the ancestral hall. He wanted to see Kuang Ye's attitude towards his father. If Kuang Yi only cupped his fists in a perfunctory manner, then it would be difficult to befriend someone who did not care about old ties. In that case, he would have to keep his bottom line when interacting with Kuang Yi in the future. From the looks of it, Kuang Ye's performance was not bad. Yang Chendong could not help but want to recruit him. Of course, this so-called intention to recruit was just a thought. Kuang Yi was already very old and his thinking was somewhat old-fashioned. It would not be easy to convince him. Furthermore, he had served the great Ming Empire for his entire life. His heart might not be able to change in such a short time. Since that was the case, it was better to let him be a loyal minister. If there was a chance, he would make sure that Kuang Yi did not die. Chapter 351. Kuang Yi naturally could not think of so many things. He was also unable to detect the strong desire in Yang Chendong's heart. After hearing the words just now, he could only sigh at the hypocrisy of the world and then went to the front hall. Today, he was here on the emperor's orders to invite Yang Chendong to send troops. After all, the chaos in the south was getting bigger and bigger. If it was not stopped, it could affect the political situation of the southern Ming dynasty. Yang Chendong, who had just changed into a green robe in the front hall, also walked in. Haha, I'm sorry to have kept Minister Kuang waiting. Is there any good news from the emperor? Haha, the loyal duke's guess is right. The emperor spent a lot of effort to invite you. This time he even put in enough capital. He even acknowledged the legitimacy of the northern Ming dynasty. Only then did he get you, a great general, to come out. Don't let down the emperor's good intentions. Kuang Ye's face was smiling, but in fact, his heart was bleeding. He had seen Zhu Qizhen's appearance when he was angry. It was true that when a dragon was angry, corpses could be strewn across 1,000 miles. Fortunately, paying such a huge price did not mean that there was no reward. Yang Chendong was able to lead troops and receive the emperor's approval. This could be considered as an explanation. This time, Yang Shan's actions had made Ying Zong very angry. If he could catch him, he would probably kill all 9 generations of his family. However, the matter had already been done. Now, he could only hope that Yang Chendong could do his best to recover some of the losses. Yang Chendong naturally pretended to be flattered. He smiled and said with a serious face, "Receiving the emperor's kindness, Chendong will naturally be willing to sacrifice my life to repay the emperor's kindness. It's just that the request made by our country's mercenaries. I wonder if your majesty will." He will. Seeing that Yang Chendong didn't intend to go back on his word, Kuang Yi hurriedly said, "The emperor empathizes with the mercenaries' efforts, so this time he is especially generous. He allows you to obtain what you need by attacking your opponents in the process of suppressing the bandits. However, please do a tally of what you have obtained and report it to me. Not only that, His Majesty also specially appointed Duke Zhongdan as His Majesty's Imperial envoy, so he could take advantage of His Majesty's actions. In addition, there are 5,600 soldiers in the Guangdong Guard Institute near Guangdong, 2,600 soldiers in the Guangzhou Prefecture, 1,000 soldiers in the Shaozhou Prefecture, and 1,000 soldiers in the Pingel Prefecture. In total, there are more than 10,000 soldiers who can be deployed by the Imperial envoy. The nearby Great Ming Prefecture will also arrange for the army's provisions. Kuang Yi seemed to be worried that Yang Qindong would go back on his word. He hurriedly took out his trump cards one by one. It seemed like he was being honest, but if one listened carefully, it seemed like there was nothing practical other than 10,000 soldiers. It was just like the problem of rations. Since they were fighting for the Southern Ming Empire, why would they need to prepare their own rations? As the saying goes, an emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. There was also the position of Imperial envoy, which was a temporary position. When you were used, you would naturally have a lot of power, but what if you were no longer needed? You would immediately be beaten back to your original state. In this aspect, Ing Zong's actions were far inferior to Dai Zong's. At the very least, Dai Zong had given him the position of Duke Zhongdan. Kuang Yi said it in a dignified manner, but in reality, he didn't have to pay much. He even had to rely on himself to rob the bandits for military expenses. If it were any other general, they would definitely shake their heads at such conditions. However, Yang Qindong had already considered everything and even planned it out. Most importantly, he needed resources and people, and he also needed a higher reputation. This could be said to be taking what each of them needed. Since that was the case, how could he refuse? Even if he didn't have these things, he would still take action. All right. Seeing that Kuang Yi had finished speaking and his mouth was dry, Yang Qindong laughed and slapped the table, saying, "This matter is decided. Thank you, Minister Cheng, for your mediation. Since I am a loyal and courageous count, I will naturally do my best to help the emperor resolve his worries to the greatest extent." Yang Qindong's promise made Kuang Yi excited. Good, with the Duke Zhongdan's help, there is naturally nothing to worry about. However, how many soldiers will the mercenaries send? Kuang Yi smiled like an old fox. His smile seemed calm, but in reality, his eyes were like swords. This was probably the problem he was most concerned about. Ha! Yang Qindong didn't immediately reply. Instead, he grinned and picked up the hot tea on the table, asking, "Minister Cheng, you must be very familiar with the situation of the mercenaries. Just like in the Battle of Tumu, I only had 100 people with me, but I still saved everyone from the battlefield. Also, when the Walla approached Baiming's capital, does Minister know how many soldiers they sent?" Kuang Yi lowered his head and began to think. "I heard that there weren't many soldiers." "That's right, there weren't many. In the end, there were only 400 people." Yang Qindong raised 4 fingers and said proudly, "With only 400 people, I dare to tell the hundreds of thousands of Walla's elites not to attack Baiming and to turn north." Then, how many mercenaries do you think are needed to deal with a group of bandits without any support? This seemed to be a rhetorical question, but it showed Yang Qindong's confidence. At this moment, he had a smile on his face, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, showing an expression of a strategist. Only 400? When Kuang Yi heard this, he was already shocked. Although the Southern Ming Empire naturally had a certain number of intelligence agents in Baiming, and the information they sent back said that there were only 400 mercenaries, this information wasn't accepted by everyone. Based on their understanding, they believed that it was impossible to turn the situation around with just 400 mercenaries. This should just be a smokescreen by the Northern Ming Empire. The reason why the number of mercenaries was so small was just to highlight the strength of the Northern Ming Empire's army. But now that these words came from Yang Qindong's mouth, the meaning was completely different. There was no need for him to lie, at least at this time. Otherwise, the moment he was exposed, he wouldn't be able to get out of this embarrassing situation. It was no wonder that Kuang Yi was so shocked. "Of course it's true." Yang Qindong nodded seriously and said as if he was reminiscing. "Back then, in order to hire these 400 mercenaries, Dai Zong paid a total of 10 million taels of silver. Thinking about it makes one's heart ache.
Fortunately, the war was won in the end and the country stabilized. Everything was worth it. When he mentioned the price of 10 million taels of silver, Kuang Ye's eyes suddenly blinked, clearly shocked. When he saw Yang Qindong staring at him, he quickly revealed a bitter smile. Duke Zhongdan, Ingzong just established himself in Nanjing and the treasury is empty. We really don't have that much money to give you. This duke knows. Yang Qindong raised his right hand and stopped Kuang Ye's words. It is precisely because this duke knows this that I didn't ask for an exorbitant price. To be honest, as a citizen of the great Ming dynasty, this duke's everything was given to me by the emperor. Now that I need an official, of course I have to step forward. Not only that, this duke has also discussed with the leader of the mercenaries. In order to completely solve the problem of the bandits in the south, the mercenaries are willing to send 3,000 soldiers. This is definitely a big deal. 3,000? Good. Kuang Yi was originally listening very seriously, but the moment he heard the number 3,000, he instantly became excited. Of course, this was also because Yang Qindong had done a good job in setting the stage. Think about it, to chase away Walla's army of more than 100,000, they only used 400 people. Although Bai Ming's army also contributed, without those 400 people, Bai Ming's old soldiers wouldn't have been able to achieve victory. In comparison, the 3,000 mercenaries this time was 7 times more than the previous time. Thus, how could Kuang Yi not be excited? No wonder he said the word, good, twice. With this foundation, the rest of the conversation became much easier. During this time, Kuang Yi also took out the Imperial sword that Ing Zongjiang had given him. He said that as an Imperial envoy, he had the power to make decisions on the spot. If any of the southern Ming officials were disobedient, he could use this sword to kill them and not be punished. He also said that Guanyin had admired the Duke of Zhongdan for a long time and greatly respected the war god. Could he use this opportunity to learn from him? Of course, with this person here, it would be easier to mobilize the nearby Ming soldiers. Yang Qindong rubbed the long sword in his hand. He had seen many imperial swords appear in movies in the future. Every time this item was taken out, it seemed to flash with a golden light. Now, he could finally hold it in his hand. Of course, the moment he held it in his hand, he realized that the sword was very ordinary. It was just a bit more flashy than a normal sword. In the end, it was just a symbol. After hearing that Guanyin was going to follow him, Yang Qindong's first thought was that Kuang Yi was monitoring him. But when he thought about it, this was normal. After all, if there were no people from the military by his side, it was inevitable that he would run into trouble. Furthermore, even if he refused Guanyin, there would probably be other people who would appear by his side for various reasons. Since this was the case, it was better to agree early and get it over with. At least he could let Kuang Yi owe him a favor. Guanyin is Minister Cheng's favorite general. He should be someone with some ability. Since this is the case, he can just follow. However, I ask Minister Cheng to tell him that as long as he follows me, he only needs to listen to my orders. I don't need him to give any opinions. Haha, speaking of which, even if he gives an opinion, I may not listen. This point needs to be made clear first. Otherwise, if you lose the battle, don't blame it on me. Chapter 352. Yang Qindong's agreement allowed Kuang Ye's heart to relax. He was very clear in his heart that even if Yang Qindong rejected him now, there was nothing he could do. After all, it was Ing Zong's idea to ask him to send troops. In order to achieve this goal, the Southern Ming Empire had paid a great price. If there was a problem because of one person, he would be guilty. As such, when Yang Qindong said that he would not allow Guanyin to interfere with his military decisions, there was no reason for him to refuse. Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Guanyin will follow you to solve some problems and learn from you. He will definitely not interfere. With Kuang Ye's assurance, a satisfied expression appeared on Yang Qindong's face. That's good, that's good. Then, when will the Duke of Loyalty decide to dispatch troops? The chaos in Guangdong is getting bigger and bigger, and there are signs of attacking the Guangzhou prefecture. Zhu Huihua has the help of the Miao soldiers, and now that Jiaoji is sending troops, the Southern Ming Empire does not have the energy to send troops to suppress the bandits. When Kuang Yi spoke of the war, he could not help but become anxious. With war everywhere, it was hard for him to be the Minister of War. There is no need to rush this. The leader of the mercenary army has been waiting for my reply. Now that I have Minister Kwang's reply, I can naturally reply to him. I believe that it will take at most half a month for their army to arrive. Yang Qindong chuckled, a playful look in his eyes. It was not that he was not anxious, but that Kwang Ye's news was too slow. He could only wait. This was the disadvantage of not having good communication. Yang Qindong's trip to Beiming's capital and persuading the Daizong Emperor to allow Yang Qindong to lead the troops took more than 20 days. By the time it reached Yang Qindong's ears, it was already close to a month. If this was a modern battlefield, the dust would have settled in a month's time, and the outcome would have been unchangeable. Hearing that he still needed to send a message to the mercenaries, although Kwang Yi was anxious, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he nodded as if he understood. Yes, the Duke of Loyalty is right. Since that's the case, please urge them more. After all, the situation at the front is urgent. That is natural. Since this Duke has accepted the Emperor's decree, I know what is more important and what is more important. Yang Qindong nodded as if he wanted Kwang Yi to be at ease. Kwang Yi finally left, leaving Guan Ying behind. From this moment on, this person was nominally Yang Qindong's subordinate. When Yang Qindong wanted to meet Guan Ying as a form of hospitality, he entered the courtyard where Guan Ying was supposed to be. However, he saw a different scene. A woman with an extremely graceful figure was sitting in the stone pavilion, looking at the pond in front of her as if she was thinking about something. Just by looking at her back, Yang Qindong couldn't help but think of a poem. More than 13 years of marriage, budding at the beginning of February. 10 miles of spring breeze on the road of Yangzhou, rolling up the beaded curtain is better than that. Yang Qindong also saw Hu Yan, Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang from the back. Although each of them had their own merits, especially Madame Shui's back was the most beautiful. However, compared to the woman in front of him, she seemed to be inferior. While he was in a daze, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from beside him. Then, another woman's anxious voice with a hint of anger was heard. Who are you? Why are you here? The person's exclamation also startled the owner of the back figure to turn around. When she turned around, her clear and bright eyes, arched eyebrows, and long eyelashes trembled slightly. Her white and flawless skin had a touch of pink, and her thin lips were as delicate as rose petals. Her hair was clean, and her face was delicate and pretty. Her clear eyes and the fresh and natural aura emitted from her body formed a beautiful picture. The woman's face was completely revealed in front of Yang Qindong, and he felt like he was in a daze. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. It was as if only the two of them existed in the world. Cough. Who are you? Please respect yourself and leave. While Yang Qindong was in a daze, the woman's voice sounded. Her voice was as pleasant as the song of an oriole, and Yang Qindong couldn't help but feel a little intoxicated. After all, he was a man who had seen much of the world. The shock quickly disappeared, and he returned to normal. He cupped his fists and said politely, I'm here to see Guan Ying, but I don't know where he went. Duke. Are you the Duke of Loyal and Daring? That woman seemed to be very intelligent. Just from this one sentence, she had guessed something and guessed Yang Qindong's identity. That's right. Yang Qindong nodded, and then looked at her curiously. I'm Su Munair. Greetings, Duke of Loyal and Daring. That's my maid, Xiao Yun. Lord Guan Ying has gone to send Lord Zhao off. I think he'll be back soon. If Duke of Loyal and Daring has any matters, you can just wait for a while. The woman bowed and replied softly. You're Su Munair. A very nice name. Yang Qindong replied with a smile, and then waved his hand. I'm just here to see how Minister Councillor Guan is staying. There's nothing important. Since he's not here, we'll talk about it later. I'm really sorry to disturb Mississippi. I'll take my leave now. After showing a sunny smile, Yang Qindong turned and left. Beta Persei, who was following beside him, almost bumped into him. Fortunately, he was trained and dodged instinctively. However, no matter how one looked at it, this action was a little awkward and funny. As if she had noticed this scene, the servant girl named Xiao Yun chuckled behind her. Yang Qindong happened to walk out of the courtyard at this moment. When he heard the laughter, he couldn't help but glare fiercely at Beta Persei,
who was following beside him. At this moment, Yang Er's head was lowered, and he had a submissive expression on his face. "All right, go and investigate the background of this Su Mun heir and report it to me."
"Young master, shouldn't she be Guan Ying's wife?"
Beta Persei was stunned and looked as if he had guessed her identity.
"You're really becoming a pig if I say you're stupid. Didn't you hear what she called Guan Ying? Also, there's going to be a war soon. As a young general favored by Kuang Yi, how could Guan Ying bring his family here?"
He shook his head in disappointment. Beta Persei was good at everything. He was skilled and loyal, but sometimes his brain was short-circuited. After following him for so long, he still hadn't learned his lesson. Sometimes, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be led astray. He was really a pig teammate. After receiving Yang Chendong's reminder and reprimand, Beta Persei nodded, then patted his chest and said, "Young master, don't worry. This matter will be handed over to Beta Persei. I'll definitely find out her identity very soon."
Go.
Yang Chendong nodded, then hummed a tune as he walked towards his own backyard. After finishing his discussion with Kuang Yi, Yang Chendong returned to his garden study and began to draft a secret order, preparing to mobilize Lang Feng inland. Yang Chendong had already expected this to happen. Naturally, Xuxian City had already received the order and began to gather the army. Just as he promised Kuang Yi, Lang Feng did indeed send 3,000 soldiers. To be specific, it was 2 regiments of Lang Feng. After a few years of development, the small number of soldiers was still one of Xianxia's drawbacks. But even if they took the path of elite soldiers, there were some things that couldn't be rushed. Fortunately, the number of soldiers was still increasing. Today, the original 2 regiments had been upgraded to 2 divisions. The Army Division commander was Lang Song, while the Navy Division commander was Gao Xiong. Each division had 2 regiments under them. Each regiment had 3 battalions and 1 company, a total of 1,000 soldiers. If that was the case, Lang Feng's regular army had around 4,000 soldiers. This time, they said they would send 3,000 soldiers. Of course, they couldn't all be the most elite and regular Lang Feng. There was also an auxiliary division. Compared to the Lang Feng regiment, the auxiliary division had more soldiers. It had 5 battalions, each with 300 soldiers. In addition, there was a reinforced battalion, 4 companies, and 1 company, a total of 2,000 soldiers. The Lang Feng regiment was the 2nd regiment of the army, a total of 1,000 soldiers. Regiment Commander Luo Pa. Speaking of Luo Pa, he was also one of the first batch of Lang Feng members trained in the Yang clan's old mansion. The only difference was that his performance back then was mediocre. But in the past few years in Xianxia City, his individual performance was extremely outstanding. Especially a while ago, when they were ambushed by the first Shang dynasty on Little Ryukyu Island, Luo Pa, who was the battalion commander, was in charge of guarding the place. But now, he didn't have enough men under him. He only had 200 soldiers under him. But even so, he still made a beautiful counterattack. He still used the powerful firepower in his hands to suppress the enemy and capture more than 500 enemy soldiers. He did not let the enemy break through the defensive line and endanger the safety of the Yang faction's territory. This battle was extremely beautiful. Even when they summed up the experience, Lang Song and Gao Xiong felt ashamed and reported this matter to Yang Chendong. Later on, when the regiment was changed to a division, Lang Feng became the division commander of the 1st Division and the regiment commander of the 1st Regiment. Luo Pa then became the regiment commander of the 2nd Regiment. This time, Luo Pa was the leader. It was also Yang Chendong's request. He wanted to see if this person was truly talented. If he was, he wouldn't hesitate to promote him. Luo Pa was the regiment commander. Kong Jia, son of Xuxian City's paper factory manager, Kong En, was one of the 5 political instructors that Yang Chendong had his eyes on. Now, he finally made a name for himself and became the political instructor of the 2nd Regiment. The 3 battalion commanders below him were Wu Shang, Chen Bo, and Kong Chuanxin, as well as Ling Daqiang, the company commander directly under him. This was the upper echelon of the 2nd Regiment. Among them, there were people that Yang Chendong was familiar with. There were also people who had been selected to become members of the Lang Feng Regiment. He wanted to use this opportunity to meet all of them.
Chapter 353. The regiment commander was called Lu Zhua, and the political commissar was Song Jie. They were people who joined Lung Feng later on, and it was said that they were all really capable. This time, they led 2,000 men to participate in the war, which was also a form of training. The so-called men were people who were prepared to take part in the test of Lung Feng. In terms of overall strength, they were naturally not as strong as Lung Feng who had passed the test. However, in terms of overall strength, they were not something a normal army could compare to. Even within these men, there were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Maybe in a short while, they would pass the test and become official members of Lung Feng. They sent out 3,000 men all of a sudden, which was close to half of the troops in Qiqian City. This was also the result of Yang Qindong's careful consideration. In the eyes of others, his mission seemed to be to deal with the chaos in Guangdong. However, only he knew that since he had already made a move, the bigger the better. If he did not obtain enough benefits, how could he stop? This was not his style. Speaking of the chaos in Guangdong, Yang Qindong picked up a piece of information from the desk. This was a detailed record of the situation in that area. The chaos in Guangdong referred to the peasant uprising that happened in Guangdong. Huang Xiaoyang, from Guangdong Nanhai, was imprisoned for a case. He led hundreds of prisoners to break out of prison and start an uprising. In the 14th year of Zheng Tong, 1449, he led 100,000 men and 1,000 ships to attack Guangzhou. He was known as Shunmin Heavenly King and changed his name to Dongyang. He gave his subordinates the titles of Duke, Marquis, Count, Grand Tutor, Admiral, Commander, etc. The uprising army attacked Guangzhou for 8 months. In the 3rd month of the following year, 1450, Imperial censor Yang Xinmin took charge and forced the uprising army to slow down their attacks. In the 5th month, Admiral Dong Xing used the chance to move troops from Jiangxi and Guang to suppress. He used the wolf troops, Guang Shidong soldiers, to enter Dazhou, killing and drowning 10,000 of them. Huang Xiao was raised by a stray arrow and sacrificed himself. The imperial army presented his head as a sacrifice, and captured his father and eldest son. The remaining troops retreated to Daliang Castle, using the terrain to fight the army. After they lost, they continued to fight along the ocean. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was still united, and it was not split into the north and south. The chaos in Guangdong was slowly suppressed by the Great Ming Dynasty. But in this life, because of Yang Qindong's unexpected intervention, Zhu Qizhen did not become a captive, nor did he become the retired emperor. He was imprisoned in the Nangong Palace, and instead came to Nanjing to establish the Southern Ming Dynasty. This change further weakened the military strength of the Southern Ming Empire. With the rebellion of the king of Min Zhuang, Zhu Huixin, and the unexpected invasion of the Jiaoji army, the situation in the southern land became very difficult. In order to solve this problem, Ingsek's Zhu Qizhen ordered the various prefectures' armies to suppress them. With no more pressure on his head, Huang Xiaoyang's second son, Huang Yuliang, took the opportunity to lead the 4 heavenly kings, Geng Jun, Sun Jianglong, Cui Hua, and Ru Honghai, and began to clean up the old subordinates and bewitch the people. In a short period of time, the troops grew larger and larger. They actually successively conquered Laizhou, Gaozhou, Xuanzhou, and Wuzhou. Now, they were attacking Zhaoqing Prefecture, which greatly threatened the safety of Guangdong's capital, Guangzhou Prefecture. During this period of time, the Southern Ming Empire also sent out troops to encircle and suppress them. The most typical example was the Guanghai Guards that protected Guangdong. Although this seemingly powerful Guanghai Guard had 5,600 soldiers, Huang Yuliang's men had infiltrated them before the battle, and he had spent a large sum of money to bribe some of the high-ranking officials. As a result, at the start of the battle, their battle plans were frequently leaked, and they were ultimately defeated and scattered by the combined efforts of both inside and outside. The defeat of the Guanghai Guards fueled Huang Yuliang's ambition, and there were no stronger Ming Empire troops around to fight against him. They could only rely on the Qianhu Guards in the nearby prefectures to barely hold on. However, after the battle, they would be heavily surrounded, and in the end, they would be defeated. After all these, the situation in Guangdong became even more dangerous. Once the Guangzhou prefecture was taken down, it would announce the fall of the entire Guangdong, which would eventually affect the nearby cities. Once he continued to move southwest, he would probably join forces with Zhu Huihua. If that was the case, they would cooperate with each other and the Southern Ming army would be caught in a pincer attack. If that was the case, the Southern Ming Empire would be in danger. In order to quickly resolve the Southern Ming Empire's crisis, Ingzong listened to Empress Qian and asked Yang Qindong to come out. He wanted to quickly resolve the matter in Guangdong so that the Southern Ming Empire could focus on dealing with Zhu Huixin, suppress the rebellion, and accumulate national strength. Looking at the information that stated that Huang Yuliang had over 200,000 soldiers, Yang Qindong threw the information onto the table. What 200,000? That was including the civilians that he had threatened. In reality, the army that he could use should be no more than 20,000 people. Moreover, most of them were people who could only fight battles that went smoothly. Once they encountered a strong army, they would probably kneel down and surrender after a single exchange. Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't put such an opponent in his eyes. All he was thinking about was how to gain more benefits from it. The South had been rich since ancient times. Although Guangdong had forbidden the sea, it had not been that long, and there were still many rich people. Among them, there was no lack of families that were as rich as a country. They usually had many connections that could ensure the safety of their family business, and the imperial court could not do anything to them. However, in the eyes of the rebels, these families were the best. They did not care about your identity or what kind of connections you had. They only knew that you were someone who would rob if you had money. Taking advantage of these chaotic times to steal their wealth was the best opportunity. Yang Qindong had his eyes on them, so how could he let them go? Thinking that once he obtained the wealth of these families in Guangdong, he would be able to further develop Qiqian City. Yang Qindong's face revealed a brilliant smile. Just as he was in a good mood, Beta Persei's thunderous voice came from outside the study. Young master, Guanyin requests to see you. Oh, let him wait in the side hall. Yang Qindong put away the smile on his face, as if performing a magic trick. His face became much more normal. Only then did he walk out of the study unhurriedly, heading towards the side hall. In the side hall, Guanyin did not wear his official robes, but changed into a military general's armor, looking majestic. When he saw Yang Qindong, who was dressed in green, step in, he immediately lowered his head and cupped his fists in greeting. Guanyin greets the Imperial envoy. The so-called Imperial envoy was not necessarily a high-ranking official. It was just a special title appointed by the emperor when he went to a place to do things. When he was an Imperial envoy, he did have the power to do things as he pleased, and for this, he looked quite powerful. Even the political envoy, equivalent to the current position of provincial governor, of the various regions had to listen to his orders. However, once he returned to the court and was removed from this position, he would be reinstated. His power would be greatly reduced, and he would become ordinary and normal again. There were even some imperial envoys who, because they had too much power and offended too many people, would be impeached by the other officials once they were removed from their power. In the end, it was normal for them to not have a good ending. Thus, from a certain perspective, the imperial envoy's job was not easy. Guanying's respectful greeting was also for the position of imperial envoy. It did not seem like he respected Yang Qindong very much. Of course, Yang Qindong was aware of this. However, compared to other people, Yang Qindong did not care about the Southern Ming court at all. Thus, even if he were to one day be removed from his position as imperial envoy, it would not affect him much. All he wanted was superficial respect and temporary respect, and that was enough. Thus, facing Guanying's greeting, he nodded lightly. Can I call you General Guan in the future? In that case, I like this title very much. Guanying raised his head after hearing this and revealed a kind smile. Good. General Guan. Since it is like this, we will be working together for a period of time in the future. I hope you will not be stingy with your guidance. Yang Qindong also nodded with satisfaction. He liked officials who were practical. On the other hand, those who opened their mouths and spoke of the emperor's boundless kindness and the righteousness of the world were mostly armchair strategists. He did not believe that such people were very capable. Yang Qindong's politeness fell into Guanying's ears. He immediately replied politely, Imperial envoy is joking. However, if there is anything you need my cooperation with, just tell me. Good. Since it is like this, I will have to trouble General Guan to organize the specific situation of Guangdong and the information of the local officials and send it to me. I need to understand them further so that I can make judgments. Yang Qindong immediately said without any trace of politeness.
Although the Security Bureau had its own intelligence system, under his orders, they had long begun to pay attention to the development of the situation in Guangdong. Furthermore, there were already people who had infiltrated the chaotic army. However, since it was intelligence, of course, the more the better. They could also make comparisons at crucial times. Guan Ying had long prepared for Yang Qindong's request. This was also the order of Kuangye minister before he left. It was that he could report to Yang Qindong in detail if there was anything related to Guangdong. Since Yingzong had chosen Yang Qindong as the main general, then naturally, everything had to be done in cooperation. Thinking of this, Guan Ying once again cupped his hands and replied, "Please be at ease, Imperial Envoy. I will go back and organize the information and try to send the things you want as soon as possible. And then you can go." Yang Qindong nodded and began to send him off. However, Guan Ying didn't intend to leave immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and pondered for a while before saying, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, there is a woman in my courtyard who admires Duke's talent very much. Please let me report to her." "Girl." When Yang Qindong said this, the beautiful girl he saw in the courtyard appeared in his mind. He immediately nodded lightly. "All right, I like to give pointers to the younger generation. Let her come over when she has time." Chapter 354. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Guan Ying did not address him as an imperial envoy but as a duke, indicating that this was a private matter. Thinking that Yang Qindong would understand the meaning, since the matter was done, he cupped his fist and left. Just as Guan Ying left, Beta Persei walked in with the deputy director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. "Young master, that woman's identity has been investigated, let Yang San say it. She should be sent by Emperor Yingzong." Yang Qindong first nodded slightly to Yang San, then stared sharply at him. Being stared at by Yang Qindong, Yang San quickly cupped his fist and replied, "Young master's eyes are sharp, that woman indeed came on the emperor's order." Hearing that he had guessed correctly, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh, then said, "It seems that after young master, I married 4 beautiful wives. I'm afraid that everyone in the world thinks that I'm a womanizer. It's also rare that the dignified Emperor Yingzong would cater to my liking. Forget it, forget it. Tell me her true identity." The young master actually knew everything. While Yang San was impressed, he also replied, "The woman's surname is Su, named Man, also known as Su Wugu, referring to her soft and charming skills that few people can match, as if she doesn't have any bones in her body. This person is the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, 18 years old, but has always been clean and honest, selling her skills and not her body. Because of her exceptional beauty, and her proficiency in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, many nobles flocked to her. Even the current emperor of the southern Ming dynasty was tempted by her. However, due to the rumors, he didn't take any action. This time, it was Minister Kuangye who invited her here under the emperor's order. As for the reason, it still needs to be investigated in detail. To be able to get such detailed information in such a short time, it is enough to show the powerful ability of the Security Bureau. Yang Qindong was also very satisfied with this. "Well done. Since that's the case, send someone to investigate again. We must ensure that the information is detailed and accurate." Yang San, who was praised by Yang Qindong, was very excited. "Young master, please rest assured that the Security Bureau will immediately send people to investigate and clarify all the details. We can use Mao Mu's connections. Since it's related to women, he must know more about it since he works for Empress Qian." Yang Qindong pointed out. His intuition told him that if Su Monair had only come because she admired him, he could understand. However, as the #1 courtesan on the banks of the Qinhuai River, she didn't have to take the risk. Whether or not there was a problem in this was worth pondering. If he didn't find out the reason, he wouldn't feel at ease letting her stay by his side. Yang Sen quickly left after receiving the order. Beta Persei, who had just left, quickly came in and said with a troubled expression, "Young master, Miss Su wants to see you." I see. I'm busy with something important. Let third madam accompany her." Yang Qindong was looking down at something, and didn't even raise his head as he spoke. In the backyard of the Yang family's old house, third Madame Shui went to see Su Monair after receiving Beta Persei's report. Not to mention that they were all courtesans, they had a lot in common. This summoner was quite capable. It didn't take long for her to attract bursts of laughter from Madame Shui. Such laughter alarmed first Madame Hu Yan. She learned the identity of the visitor from her personal maid, Xiaoqing. After thinking about it, she went to the study and saw Yang Chendong. Sixth brother. Hu Yan appeared. Seeing Yang Chendong sitting on a wooden chair with his eyes closed, she called him softly. Yan, come here. Hearing the sound, Yang Chendong opened his eyes. When he saw Hu Yan standing outside the door, he smiled and raised his hands, as if asking for a hug. A trace of shyness flashed across Hu Yan's face. She walked into the study with a 3-inch golden lotus and soon fell into Yang Chendong's arms. Even so, she still said shyly, "Sixth brother, Beta Persei and Xiaoqing are outside. I'm afraid they will laugh at us." "What are you laughing at? You're my wife, and I'm your husband. It's natural for us to love each other as husband and wife. There's no need to care so much," Yang Chendong said indifferently. After picking up Hu Yan, he frowned slightly. "Why have you lost weight again? Are you not satisfied with the food?" "Alas, the southern food is good, but it's too bland." "No, it's very good. I like these bland foods." Hu Yan shook her head quickly. She was born in the Hu family. Since she was born, her grandfather, Hu Xiao, had been a high-ranking official. She grew up in luxury and had never been mistreated. But compared to after following Yang Chendong, she found that her previous life was somewhat shabby. Yang Chendong was not short of money, and the things he sold were all good. Once they were put on the market, they would be easily digested. It was not an exaggeration to say that the supply could not meet the demand. The price of such goods was naturally very high, and the profit was naturally great. Under such circumstances, the Yang family had always eaten the best and wore the best. As the first madam, Hu Yan was the first to eat good things. It was really much better than what she ate when she was a girl in the Hu residence. Hu Yan was very satisfied. When Yang Chendong complained that he was not satisfied with the food, she said those words. But since Yang Chendong said so, how could she easily change her mind because of the words of others? Well, Lulang didn't say that the southern food is bad. He was just afraid that you are not used to it after living in the north for a long time. How about this? We really have nothing to do in the afternoon. Why don't we barbecue by ourselves? In this way, we can add ingredients according to each person's appetite. Won't everyone be satisfied? Speaking of which, Yang Chendong had not barbecued with them for a long time. Hu Yan really missed it. Of course, the delicious food was a part of it, but more importantly, she would have the opportunity to work with Yang Chendong and improve their relationship. She immediately nodded in agreement. That's good. Then this concubine will have someone arrange it. By the way, do you want to call Miss Su together? No need. Yang Chendong said with a normal expression, this is just our family's activity. There's no need to disturb any outsiders. Oh, okay. When Hu Yan answered, her expression was very natural, but her eyes were much brighter, as if she had put down something. Hu Yan left. When she left, her footsteps were obviously much lighter. Yang Chendong saw all of this. He knew that no woman was willing to share the man she liked with other women. No matter how magnanimous she was and how nice her words were, when it really happened, there would still be a trace of resistance and unwillingness in her heart. Thinking of this, although Su Maner was indeed unbelievably beautiful, Yang Chendong still lost some interest. When he had many women, he realized that the thought was the most important. As for women, how many was enough? How many was enough to satisfy one? Hu Yan left happily. Then, as the wife of the family head, she began to take care of the barbecue in the afternoon. As the #1 cook Yang Chendong had used for many years, Yi Chou'er was naturally the main force. This time, she had also returned to Jianghu Mansion from the capital. At this moment, she began to prepare all kinds of ingredients and condiments. Not long after, fourth brother Yang Yang also rushed over after hearing the news. When he was in the capital, he had been lucky enough to participate in the barbecue once and found it very interesting. Now that he had another chance, how could he let it go? He immediately rolled up his arms and sleeves, indicating that he was going to do something. Since Master Xianxia was here, third Madame Shui naturally had to show up. After hearing the news from the maid Xiao Wei, she found an excuse to ask Su Maner to leave. As soon as she entered the backyard, she saw Hu Yan, who was busy directing the crowd from afar. She called her sister and came over. As soon as Hu Yan saw Madame Shui, she blinked twice and asked as if there was a hidden meaning in her words. "Sister, you're here.
By the way, where is Miss Su?"
Madame Shui naturally knew that Hu Yan was testing her, so she answered with a smile.
"I told her that I was tired, so she sensibly left. By the way, what did my husband mean?"
As she spoke, she pointed in the direction of the study with her slender finger.
"He didn't mean anything.
It's just that when I asked if we should invite Miss Su to barbecue together, Lu Lang said that this was a family matter and there was no need to invite outsiders." When Hu Yan said the last sentence, she was already smiling like a beautiful woman.
"Sister, you're amazing." Madame Shui secretly praised her sister after hearing this.
The so-called amazing naturally referred to Hu Yan's testing. It was just a simple question, which would not reveal anything, but she did get the answer she wanted. At least, Miss Su would not have the opportunity to become their sister for the time being. While the two women were whispering here, Xianxia had been driven out of the kitchen by Yiqiuer and the others.
Important place.
The reason was naturally because not only could he not be of any help, he would only cause trouble.
However, he did not care about this.
Instead, he asked where sixth brother was and hurried over. Yang Chendong was about to go from the study to the inner courtyard when he saw his brother. He said with a smile, "Fourth brother, why are you so travel-worn?
Did you fall in love with a good person or something else?"
Good person naturally referred to beautiful women, and something else referred to interesting things. This time, Yang Chendong followed Yang Chendong back to the Yang family's old mansion. Nominally, he was returning to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors, but in reality, he was going on a sightseeing tour. After leaving the shackles of the capital, he, who was originally a hedonistic young master, received the support of Yang Chendong and spent a lot of money to get many things he liked, including some beauties and rare objects. Regarding this, Yang Chendong didn't have the slightest intention to stop it. Since it was his own elder brother, why not spend some money to make him happy? Moreover, his fourth brother had always been on his side, which was rare.
He should cherish and keep it. Chapter 355.
After being praised by Yang Chendong as a good person, Yang immediately laughed in embarrassment. It was true that he was fourth brother, and in terms of age, he was much older than Yang Chendong. However, it was as if he had not grown up yet.
He liked to show all his thoughts on his face.
However, it was only awkward for a moment before he immediately countered with a smile. "That's right, fourth brother heard that a beauty came to the residence. It is said that she is the #1 courtesan of the Qinhuai Sea.
She is very beautiful."
"Has sixth brother seen her before?"
"Of course I have. She is indeed very beautiful."
Yang Chendong did not have any intention of hiding and gave a direct answer.
"Oh, she is so beautiful. Why is sixth brother not moved?"
Yang Xi's interest was immediately piqued. He asked as he walked forward.
There is no good beauty.
There is no good banquet," Yang Chendong said with a prophecy. Yang was able to become a disciple of the Yang family and play around in the capital for so many years without any problems.
He really had some ability.
Just from this sentence, he felt something. He immediately asked carefully. "Since that is the case, fourth brother should control himself. At the very least, you have to find out the other party's background."
"Of course.
Sixth brother is no longer a virgin.
Fourth brother, don't worry."
In response to Yang Chendong's reminder, Yang Chendong smiled and then strode towards the inner courtyard at the back. He had heard of the honey trap countless times. This kind of cliché method might be the most useful in many cases. However, when it came to being useful to him, it was not an easy matter. The loyal duke knew what he needed now and what he should stay away from. The inner courtyard at the back started to become lively. Not long after, the smell of smoke and fire started to drift in with the air. Xiao Yunju, who was also in the inner courtyard but was not considered a maid in the inner courtyard, pouted and had an unhappy expression.
"Young miss, what are they doing? Why didn't they call us over?"
Su Maner, who was addressed as young miss, naturally also felt the commotion outside the wall. However, her expression was ordinary, and no emotions could be seen.
She lowered her head to look at a zither score.
Only when Xiao Yun asked did she raise her head and say, "That is the Duke of Loyal and Bold's family matter.
We are still just outsiders." Outsiders? No matter what he said, it didn't matter. Who was the young mistress?
She was the #1 courtesan on the banks of the Qinhuai River. Who knew how many nobles had to pay in every possible way just to see the young mistress? There were also many who wanted to marry the young mistress as a concubine. There were even some young talents who wanted to marry the young mistress as their official wife. They were nothing now, but perhaps in a few years, they would become high and mighty figures.
It was a good choice. But what are we doing here?
She had taken the initiative to deliver herself to the door, but the other party didn't even bother to meet her.
He only sent a concubine to have a chat, and that was considered a welcome. Thinking about it, it was really infuriating.
"Miss, why don't we leave this place and return to Qinhuai River to continue our carefree life?" Xiao Yun was a straightforward person, saying whatever she thought of. In the end, all of this was because she felt wronged and wanted to fight for justice for her young miss. However, when Sumaner heard this, a hint of melancholy flashed across her face. Fortunately, Xiao Yun only cared about her own mouth and did not notice this scene at all. Sumaner fell silent again, and her gaze landed on the zither score again. Seeing that her young miss had no intention of being moved, Xiao Yun could only mumble for a while and shut her mouth again.
Sumaner's matter was just a spice in life.
When Yang Qindong decided not to meet her for the time being before he had a clear understanding of her background, she was like air. Other than occasionally paying respects to First Madame Hu Yen and discussing her skills with Third Madame Shui, she stayed in the Yang family's side courtyard quite quietly.
In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed.
The Langfeng army had already disembarked from Fuzhou Prefecture.
According to Yang Qindong's instructions, they did not turn to Jianghu. Instead, they headed straight for Jiangxi's Ganzhou to meet up.
Yang Qindong also left Jianghu Prefecture the day after he received the news and headed straight for Ganzhou. The ancestral worship seemed to have come to an end. When Yang Qindong left the Yang family's old mansion, other than the old housekeeper, Yang Hai, who stayed behind to preside over the overall situation, fourth brother, Yang Yang, also stayed behind. This was Yang Yang's request and Yang Qindong's tacit approval. The situation on the battlefield was ever-changing. Even with the most advanced firearms, Yang Qindong did not dare to say that he would win every battle without any danger. If he brought fourth brother with him, if something happened, how would he answer to the Yang family?
It was safer to stay in Jianghu.
As for whether it was safe to stay here, as long as Yang Qindong was on the front lines and the war was going smoothly, no one would make things difficult for him.
Who would do such a thankless task that would offend others? Not only that, the Nanming Empire would probably focus on protecting his safety.
Other than fourth brother Yang Yang, everyone else, including the two madams, followed him out of Jianghu and headed straight for Ganzhou. This naturally included General Guan Ying and Sumaner, who were allowed to follow the army. After the large group of people left the city, they traveled quickly along the road. Their speed was not slow at all. Yang Qindong sat in the luxurious carriage in the center and did not show his face. Sumaner wanted to strike up a conversation with him several times but did not manage to catch a glimpse of him. From Sumaner's point of view, this Duke of Loyalty was really mysterious. She had been here for more than 10 days, but she had only seen his back view from afar. It was so difficult for her to see this person, as if she was seeing the emperor. All these changes lasted until they reached the outskirts of Ganzhou City. Finally, Sumaner, who was sitting in the carriage, could see Yang Qindong's true appearance. It was a rainy and gloomy day. In this kind of weather, people should be hiding in their houses. Even if they were rushing, they should be hiding in their carriages. Soldiers should be hiding in their barracks. However, this was not the case at the outskirts of Ganzhou City. Looking from afar, a green wall that was as tall as a person appeared in front of her. It was not affected by the rain outside at all. The green wall that appeared from afar was Xianxia's new army of 3,000 soldiers. Among them, 1,000 were the elite 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front. 2,000 were the 1st Battalion of the Auxiliary Battalion, whose combat strength was slightly lower but whose overall quality was much higher than the ordinary Ming army. Lang Feng was still dressed the same as before. He was wearing a green camouflage uniform with a beret on his head and military boots on his feet. From afar, he looked majestic and valiant. The auxiliary battalion wore a more ordinary green uniform for training. They did not have any standard military ranks. Even so, when 2,000 people stood together neatly, it still gave off a very majestic feeling. Among them, many people were holding back their energy, thinking that they could change into a more spirited camouflage uniform and become a true member of the Cold Front. This comparison was purposely arranged by Yang Chendong. The Cold Front was suppressing the auxiliary battalion everywhere. This was equivalent to encouraging everyone. If they wanted to receive better treatment and more respect, they had to rely on their own efforts to achieve it. The sudden appearance of the 3,000 Cold Front was waiting for their master, the young master, Yang Chendong, to inspect them. Once they entered Xianxia, even if they were the lowest level of auxiliary battalion, they still needed to train their formation. This was so that one day, the 6th young master could inspect them and prove themselves. Now that the main character had finally appeared, everyone stood up with 200% of their spirit. Even if it was drizzling, it would not be able to stop their passion from radiating in all directions. The Cold Front was right in front of them, waiting to be inspected. As their master, Yang Chendong had to appear. Therefore he walked out of the luxurious carriage and pushed away Tiger's Mane, who was about to hold an umbrella for him. Dressed in green, he walked with steady steps towards the Cold Front. At this moment, just by looking at his back, he was like a giant. He appeared on the ground and covered all the light in the world. Naturally, he became the most dazzling person. What Sumaner saw was Yang Chendong's majesty at this moment. The other person saw the strict military discipline and a solemn murderous aura. Guan Ying originally had experience in the military. Later on, he was transferred to Bing Chong by Kuang Ye's discerning eyes. This kind of person, who had both practical experience and theory, naturally had a different understanding of the military than normal people. Just like now, what he saw was a wave of majesty and solemnity that could even shake his soul. Guan Ying had followed Kuang Yi to inspect the entire country's military and had seen countless soldiers. However, even the royal army that belonged to Emperor Yingzong's direct subordinates didn't seem to be able to compare with these mercenaries in terms of aura. Strictly speaking, the difference wasn't just a little bit. Guan Ying could be considered to have heard of the name of mercenaries. Minister Kuang Yi had said more than once that although the mercenaries he saw at the Battle of Tumu Castle were only 100 or so people, their military discipline was strict and their killing intent was overflowing. When he heard this in the past, Guan Ying always thought that Minister Kuang Yi was exaggerating and was even praising others while lowering his own morale. Perhaps this was a method of encouragement, but it was too much and could easily hurt the morale of the southern Ming army. However, when he saw the mercenaries lined up neatly, he knew that Minister Kuang Yi was not lying. The army in front of him was indeed the first he had seen in his life. Just this kind of aura made him feel full of confidence. Perhaps this kind of army should be invincible. No matter what kind of thoughts others had when they saw this scene. Yang Chendong, who was walking forward, felt agitated. When the camouflage uniforms appeared in front of him, he felt as if a lifetime had passed. It was as if he had returned to that era and could see the most adorable and respectable comrades in arms. It was because of this group of people that the country could have dignity, be recognized by others, and be able to stand tall in the world and not be bullied by others. This kind of feeling lasted until he walked to the front of the formation. The commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment, Luo Pa, ran out from the formation and stood in front of Yang Chendong. He shouted in a loud voice, "Chief, the 2nd Cold Front Regiment and the 1st Auxiliary Regiment have finished gathering. There should be 3,098 people. 3,098 people. Please inspect them." Chapter 356. The loud and impassioned voice was like a waterfall that soared into the sky. At this moment, not only were the 3,000 soldiers standing upright, even Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Wuxia, and the other elites of the Cold Front who were watching all this from afar stood upright. They looked like they were about to be inspected by Yang Chendong. "Please be at ease." Yang Chendong's heartbeat quickened, but he tried his best to maintain a calm expression. "Yes, sir." Luo Pa saluted again, then turned around and ran back to the formation. He stood beside the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, and looked at Yang Chendong in front of him. Their 6th young master was also the founder of Xianxia's new army. He was also their leader and spiritual pillar. To become a member of the Cold Front, one had to go through the recognition of loyalty.
What was loyalty?
It was to be loyal to the sixth young master. In this aspect, the political instructors did a good job. Their usual propaganda was also on point. They used an almost brainwashing method to make everyone understand that the reason why they could have such good equipment, such good military discipline, such a good life, and such a beautiful and limitless future was all thanks to the support and contributions of the sixth young master.
The sixth young master had done so much for them. So what should they do to thank him? Shouldn't he perform well and prove his strength with his actions? Should he prove that the sixth young master didn't misjudge him? At the same time, he should use his actions to fight for more glory and protect this hard-won happiness for himself and his future descendants?
It was precisely because of this kind of teaching that Yang Chendong was gradually regarded as the incarnation of God.
As long as it was the cold front, no one would not respect him and thank him. And today, this legendary figure was standing in front of them. How could they not be excited? How could they not be excited?
After the order to be at ease, the 3,000 soldiers raised their left feet in unison.
Then, Yang Chendong walked to the front of the 3,000 people in a few strides. Dressed in green, he looked a little frail, especially under the drizzle. He looked a little haggard. However, when the person standing there was Yang Chendong, everything changed. When he opened his mouth and said, "Comrades, thank you for your hard work," the 3,000 soldiers replied in unison.
"We serve the people."
"Good. I have seen your performance. I am very happy and even a little excited." Yang Chendong raised his right hand, and the 3,000 Xianxia soldiers quieted down again. At this moment, only Yang Chendong's voice could be heard in the drizzle.
"You guys are the most outstanding cold front. You guys are also the strongest mercenary army in the world. You guys have the strictest training and the strongest weapons in the world. This means that you guys are now, and will always be, the strongest army.
In the future, your children and grandchildren will be proud of you. Today, the heroic sect of the Southern Ming dynasty invited us to help them quell the rebellion because they saw your abilities. Only those who have fought 100 battles can be called elite soldiers. Next, you will face real battles, and you might even face life and death.
However, please believe me when I say that as long as you can perform normally and perform well with what you have learned, the winner will definitely be you.
Military achievements are right in front of you, and glory is right in front of you. Comrades, work hard. I will watch your wonderful performance from the side. Do you have the confidence to defeat the enemy and show our military might?"
"Yes, yes, yes."
The excited voices continued to reverberate in the air. At this moment, the drizzle stopped, as if it was affected by the warrior's passion. The moment the drizzle stopped, Yang Chendong saluted solemnly and ended his speech. In fact, Yang Chendong had a lot to say, so he had to choose some things to say. After all, Guanyin was behind him, and there were a few great Ming soldiers following him. When the time was not right, he had to endure and hide some things. After he finished speaking, the soldier was also promoted at this moment.
The companies of the various battalions began to lead their troops to change directions, opening up a path for the 6th Young Master's convoy to move forward.
The commander of the 2nd Regiment, Luo Pa, and the political commissar, Kong Jia, as well as the commander of the 1st Regiment, Lu Zhua, and the political commissar, Song Zhe, quickly ran in front of Yang Chendong, as if they were waiting for orders.
Yang Chendong, who had been prepared for this, immediately handed a battle order to the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia.
"This is the next step of the battle. Familiarize yourselves with it first, then strictly carry it out.
During this time, the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment will replace the 1st Battalion to be in charge of the young master's safety."
"Yes." The 4 regimental commanders saluted in unison and began to make arrangements. Then, they waited for the military meeting to begin. At this moment, the great Ming soldiers beside the cold front finally gathered. Guanyin, who was at the back of the group, also came over. Duke of Loyalty, Guangdong Political Commissioner and the generals from the surrounding areas are all here. Also, we have new news. Zhaoqing Prefecture has been attacked by the bandits. Zhaoqing General Jiaping has arrived and is waiting for Duke of Loyalty's instructions. Zhaoqing is lost.
Yang Chendong stood there with a solemn face and asked,
"Yes, it's lost." Guanyin lowered his head and said in pain. When he saw the strict military discipline of the mercenaries and how majestic their troops were, he was determined to go all out. However, the bad news that followed was like a bucket of cold water that instantly woke him up.
Thinking of his own incompetence and the strength of the mercenaries, this stark contrast made him feel even more ashamed and unable to show his face.
All right, gather them here. There are some things that need to be decided.
Yang Chendong's voice was calm as usual, but for some reason, Guan Ying felt a trace of killing intent from his words.
However, when he thought about it, they had yet to meet an enemy.
Perhaps it was just his own misconception.
Guan Ying moved quickly.
In less than an hour, a 70 to 80 square meter military tent was erected. The generals of the nearby Great Ming army also gathered here. Before he could inform anyone, Yang Chendong brought a group of mercenaries into the tent. Following Yang Chendong's entrance, the southern Ming generals who were originally chattering immediately shut their mouths. Then, they curiously looked at the youngest loyal duke of the Great Ming dynasty, who had just walked in with a fawning expression.
The Duke of Loyalty had long been famous, but everything came from hearsay.
It was because of hearsay that everyone had their own understanding. Yang Chendong was only in his early 20s, but the hearsay and legend had been criticized by too many people. For example, saving Emperor Yingzong and the 9 important ministers was just a matter of luck. For example, repelling the Walla army was just a matter of Emperor Yingzong hiding his own strength and giving the credit to Yang Chendong. However, all these hearsay and legends seemed unreal after seeing Yang Chendong meet with the mercenaries. Could it be that this young Duke of Loyalty and Courage really had a great ability?
The doubt, curiosity, and even speculation in their eyes became more and more intense. Under such gazes, Yang Chendong walked into the tent and sat down on the main seat.
The moment he sat down, Hu Mang, who was following beside him, took out the imperial sword bestowed by Emperor Yingzong and held it in his hands. The appearance of the imperial sword caused everyone's eyes to involuntarily focus.
What did this action mean?
Was it showing his authority?
Many people's expressions changed, but there were also some who showed disapproving expressions. Perhaps in their eyes, this action was a sign of cowardice. If you really had authority, why did you need to use the imperial sword to do things?
While everyone was guessing, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on Guan Ying, who was standing on the left. General Guan, you can begin.
Yes, Lord Imperial Envoy.
Guan Ying nodded his head, emphasizing the word Imperial Envoy.
Then he introduced Yang Chendong to the Ming dynasty officials in the tent.
Guangdong Political Commissioner Liu Youfu, who was sitting on the right, was an old man who looked to be in his 50s.
He was a secondary grade 2 official.
He had been appointed for less than a year. Guangdong Police Commissioner Han Qing was a man in his 40s with a murderous aura. He was in charge of the criminal matters of Guangdong Province and was also a secondary grade 2 official. Guangdong Guard Commander Ma Wei, primary grade 3, Pingyue House General He Shang, primary grade 4, Shaozhou House General Yu Guang, primary grade 4. Following Guan Ying's introduction, everyone who was called gave Yang Chendong a friendly smile. To this, Yang Chendong also smiled in response. At the end of the introduction, when Zhaoqing House General Jia Ping was introduced, Yang Chendong suddenly interrupted, "You're the general who just lost Zhaoqing House?"
Jia Ping, who was called, trembled all over. This time, he purposely didn't change his armor. He wanted to show his blood-soaked side so that he could win the sympathy of others. After all, Zhaoqing Prefecture was lost in his hands. In reality, he was indeed fearful of the enemy. When Zhaoqing Prefecture was still able to hold on, he was attacked by Huang Yuliang's bandits. Worried about his own safety, he abandoned the Zhaoqing Prefecture's magistrate who still wanted to defend the city and escaped with 100 soldiers. Because of Jia Ping's sudden escape, the city fell into chaos. The morale of the soldiers was low. Even a general had no confidence, let alone a normal soldier. In order to survive, some of them opened the city gates and led the bandits into the city. In the end, most of the civilians were robbed, and the Zhaoqing House's prefect was killed in the chaos. Not long after he escaped, Jia Ping received the news. He was indeed afraid at first, but when he saw Lord Han Qing of the Detention Bureau in Gan Province City, he finally relaxed. It wasn't for any other reason. It was only because this person was his backer. So, he usually showed his filial piety to him. Moreover, he had contacted the Jia clan for this matter, and had taken out a large sum of money to give to Han Qing in order to protect his life. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.